Most Star Wars villains are easy to read. Dooku never was, and that's exactly what made him so dangerous. Count Dooku is far worse than most Star Wars fans realize, because for decades, the former Jedi Master has been portrayed as a tragic figure, a principled idealist who simply lost his way. The films present him as a dignified aristocrat who became disillusioned with Republic corruption, while extended universe materials suggest he genuinely believed in reforming the galaxy, and even his death scene implies a man who was merely deceived by Palpatine rather than someone broken from the start. But the primary sources tell a very different story. Across both Canon and Legends continuity, novels and comics reveal that his noble facade was always a mask covering something far more disturbing. A man incapable of caring about other beings, who viewed everyone around him as either tools to be used or threats to be eliminated. Upon examining the source material from Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novelization, James Luceno's Darth Plagueis and Labyrinth of Evil, Cavan Scott's Dooku Jedi Lost, Jude Watson's Legacy of the Jedi, and Hayden Blackman's Jango Fett Open Seasons comics, I have found 7 key reasons that reveal why Count Dooku is far worse than most fans realize. The first reason is that his public story was carefully constructed fiction. In the Legends Revenge of the Sith novelization, the Count is described as the nemesis of the corrupt Republic, a symbol of the principled Confederacy, but the book immediately undercuts this image by revealing it as the public story, and the story that even he, in his weaker moments, almost believes. The key phrase here is almost believes, because even the Count himself could not fully commit to his own mythology. The official narrative claimed that at 70 years old, his principles would no longer allow him to serve a republic where political power was sold to the highest bidder, placing him among the lost, those Jedi who renounced their oaths in service of ideals higher than even the Order professed. According to this story, he used all the power of his family fortune and his reputation for unquestioned integrity to begin cleansing the galaxy of corruption through the separatist movement. In fact, the resignation statement reads like a political press release. In canon continuity, especially in Dooku Jedi Lost, the Count presents himself to the Senate as a champion of forgotten Outer Rim worlds, advocating for equal protection and urging senators to reconsider cuts to trade route defense programs. On behalf of the Jedi, he requests that only a fully funded Republic Guard can provide the security citizens deserve. But after his speeches fail to change policy, Senator Palpatine flatters his idealism and encourages him to continue being a voice for the Jedi in the Senate. The senator tells him this is where he can make a real difference, beginning a manipulation that would continue for years. Asajj Ventress, who would later become his assassin, observes his public image with growing unease. She sees him as adrift, a man playing king without any clear higher purpose. His Sith beliefs already give him power. His inheritance already gives him riches, yet even his own apprentice cannot understand his motivations because they are built on emptiness rather than genuine grievance. Despite this lack of genuine purpose, his resignation statement preserved on the Great Holocron shows calculated messaging designed to protect his political future. According to the Legends sourcebook, Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, the former Jedi announced that for many years he had served the Order and done his best to honor its traditions while claiming he planned to return to Serenno and serve his people as a philanthropist. His final request as a Jedi Master was that the Order respect his decision and his privacy, with closing words expressing farewell to old friends and wishing the Force be with them. Palpatine played his part perfectly, responding publicly with a message to the Council expressing sadness at the Count's decision, claiming to have only met him a few times while certainly knowing his reputation and even admiring him, despite not entirely agreeing with his criticisms of the Senate. This public exchange established both men as concerned citizens while hiding their growing private alliance, as Palpatine had been cultivating the aristocrat as a confidant for years behind closed doors. Even scholarly assessments completely miss the warning signs. Sourcebooks note that, unlike other Jedi who took the path to the dark side, the Count remains something of an enigma, and if he craved power in his youth, he was extremely discreet about it. This discretion was precisely the point, as he spent his entire life hiding his true nature behind aristocratic manners and noble rhetoric. In Labyrinth of Evil, Yoda reflects on how the Council dismissed warning signs because the Masters could not conceive of the former Jedi as anything but an idealist. The Ancient Master later admitted with deep sorrow that the Council had been blind to the danger of his pride. Even after he became leader of the Separatists, Obi-Wan recalled his pitch on Geonosis, where the Count framed himself as still aligned with Jedi values while merely attempting to defeat the dark side by his own methods. He openly criticized the Republic, pretending to be a disappointed idealist while secretly plotting galactic war. Moving on to the second reason, Dooku possessed intelligence without empathy, a psychological defect that shaped his entire existence. The novelization gives the most disturbing psychological profile of any Star Wars character, revealing that he does not remember when he discovered his difference from other beings. It may have been when he was a young Padawan, betrayed by another learner who claimed to be his friend, when Lorian Nod said directly to his face that he did not know what friendship was, and in that moment, he realized his classmate was absolutely correct. The book explains that he has never understood what beings mean when they speak of friendship. Even when he can feel emotions like love, hate, joy, and anger in others, he processes them differently. He experiences human emotion as information rather than feelings. Instead, the Count only understands jealousy and possessiveness because he is fierce when any being encroaches on what is rightfully his, while intolerance at the undisciplined lives of ordinary beings remains his normal state. Spite is a recreation for him, as he takes considerable pleasure from the suffering of his enemies, while pride registers as a virtue in an aristocrat, and indignation as his inalienable right. Moral outrage makes perfect sense to him when the affairs of ordinary beings refuse to conform to how society ought to be structured. Then, the novelization reveals how he categorizes every living being. He is entirely incapable of caring what any creature might feel for him, caring only what the creature might do for him or to him. A single sentence that explains everything about his relationships throughout life. His apprentices, his allies, his family members, none of them mattered as people because they were functions to be performed rather than individuals with inner lives worth considering. The narrative explains that very possibly he is what he is because other beings just are not very interesting to him, or even, in a sense, entirely real in the way he experiences existence. This is not merely selfishness or arrogance, but an inability to perceive others as having inner lives that matter, meaning everyone exists only in relation to his interests. For the former Jedi, other beings are abstractions that he sorts into two categories: assets and threats. Assets are beings who can serve his interests, while threats include everyone else. There is no third category. No room for friends, loved ones, or neutral parties because everyone is either useful or dangerous. This explains his treatment of the Separatist leaders, as sources reveal that being considered a threat by Count Dooku is a death sentence. He plans to eliminate his current allies, including the heads of the Trade Federation, Intergalactic Banking Clan, Techno Union, and Corporate Alliance. These organizations funded his war and believed themselves his partners. But to the Sith Lord, they were always temporary assets whose usefulness would expire once the war ended, because treachery, he understood, was the way of the Sith. The pattern started in childhood. The Lorian Nod incident from Legacy of the Jedi reveals how early this emerged. When his best friend Lorian stole a forbidden Sith holocron and begged him to lie to cover for him, young Dooku refused and told the Council the truth. The narrative describes how he imagined reporting Lorian with great satisfaction, picturing his friend's punishment and possible expulsion from the Order. When the fact of his friend's betrayal shocked him deeply, his response was cold calculation rather than grief. The incident changed him forever, as the novel reveals that he would never believe in friendship again, and if his heart was now empty of love, so be it. Most disturbing is what happened years later, when Lorian asks whether he encouraged his fears rather than reassuring him. Because looking back, Lorian finds that strange, since he would not have done that to the Count, making the implication clear. Even as a child, the aristocrat manipulated his closest friend toward disaster. When Lorian confronted him one last time before they parted, the young Jedi didn't respond. He simply thought to himself, why bother? He had the career. Lorian had nothing. Sources also reveal his preference for analysis over emotion. As when asked about how he felt about something, the young Jedi responds that he did not ask about feelings, but about thoughts, dismissing the Order's insistence on feelings as all well and good while making clear his preference for analysis. Even as a young man, he viewed emotional engagement as beneath him. In canon, this emotional void extended to his own family. In the audio drama, the Count orders his apprentice, Asajj Ventress, to kill his own sister, Jenza. When Jenza realizes what is happening, she tells him he is not her brother, but he insists he is, which is why he must release her. After Ventress eliminates Jenza, he shows approval before ordering her to leave no evidence. His capacity for callous violence extended even to his own blood. During Serenno's invasion, he dueled and killed his own brother, Count Rommel, seizing the title for himself without remorse. Even as a Jedi, he would eliminate family members to serve his ends. Throughout the audio drama, Ventress observes the Sith Lord with growing horror, describing him as examining her not with interest, but with idle curiosity, the way a scientist examines a rodent to see if it has mastered a new trick. He manipulates Ventress throughout their relationship by telling her the past does not define her, the future does not define her, because he defines her, making clear this is not teaching, but control. His relationship to pain is equally disturbing, as he explains that pain is only an illusion that can be controlled, with the pain still present but denied its power over him, which is not wisdom, but denial. His contempt extends to everyone he encounters, as he remarks about his brother, Rommel, before his death, that power is wasted on the powerful, while describing his closest friend Sifo-Dyas as too weak to take action, revealing that even fellow Jedi Masters fail to meet his standards. For the third reason, comparing Dooku to Qui-Gon Jinn reveals what the Count could never understand. Qui-Gon Jinn shared many of the former Master's criticisms of the Jedi Order, as the canon novel Master and Apprentice establishes that both men possess self-reliance, skepticism, and reluctance to take the Council's word as sacred. The Count even helped Qui-Gon see that he had choices within the Order, but their philosophies could not have been more different, despite these surface similarities. Qui-Gon's relationship to the Force was about surrender. The novel explains that the danger came in thinking that knowing the future gave control over it. When Qui-Gon finally understood, it was the exact opposite. Knowing the future meant surrendering to fate, surrendering to the flow of life, because only through that surrender could the Force truly be known. In contrast, his master's relationship to the Force was about control. His fascination with prophecy was not spiritual humility, but a desire for power through knowledge. Legends sources reveal that Qui-Gon must have found it difficult serving under a methodical master, a methodical planner, and master duelist. Qui-Gon had no patience for advanced planning and took situations as they came, throwing back his shoulders and striding boldly into the center of things while relying as much on his instincts as his lightsaber. The Count chose Qui-Gon as a tool, not an apprentice. Sources reveal that he chose the young Padawan strategically, maneuvering to get him the first time he saw Qui-Gon in lightsaber training. The former Jedi knew that a master would be judged by the prowess of his Padawan, and he wanted the best of the best. His goal was never to nurture Qui-Gon, but to use him as another step toward his ultimate ambition, to surpass Yoda as the greatest Jedi ever. Their different visions for the Jedi reveal this contrast. Qui-Gon wanted the Jedi to be more compassionate and connected to the living Force. He felt the Council had allowed the Order to become a sort of Chancellor's police, rather than focusing on knowing the Force. He considered it short-sighted to lose touch with the living Force by spending so much time enforcing laws that could be left to civilian authorities, and he thought it immoral to refuse to act against evils such as slavery. On the other hand, The Count wanted the Jedi to be more powerful and more willing to impose order. In canon sources, he criticizes Jedi passivity to Qui-Gon directly, asking what good they are doing sipping Avedame and making chit-chat. He argues that their predecessors pushed boundaries and explored the galaxy while making a real difference. But today, the Jedi are anachronisms who only act when politicians give their assent. Half the people think they are nothing more than a glorified police force serving as enforcers for the Senate. Both criticize the Council, but for opposite reasons. This explains why the former master completely misread his former apprentice. On Geonosis, he claimed that Qui-Gon would have joined him in championing the Separatist cause, when this was a complete misunderstanding of everything Qui-Gon believed. Evidence of his true nature appeared early in their relationship. The attack on Shenda Mal proves the Count was always capable of cruelty. In the novel, he demonstrates this when he encounters a bounty hunter threatening young Qui-Gon. After saving his apprentice, he does not simply stop the threat, but attacks Shenda Mal with force lightning. He strikes her repeatedly as Qui-Gon watches, taunting his target throughout the attack. This is not justice, but cruelty performed for its own satisfaction. Qui-Gon must intervene to stop his own master. Sources note that every other time the Count saved Qui-Gon's life, the apprentice thanked him, but this time he could not. This scene reveals that his dark side tendencies were present while he was still a Jedi Knight, proving he did not fall, but was always this way, just hiding it behind his aristocratic facade. For the fourth reason, Galidraan became the event he used to justify his transformation. In the Legends comic, Jango Fett Open Seasons, the Jedi Council dispatches the Count and a strike force to the planet Galidraan, based on reports that Mandalorians are slaughtering political activists. What the Council does not know is that the governor of Galidraan fabricated these reports under direction from Tor Vizsla and the Death Watch. When the governor protests there is no evidence, Vizsla tells him not to worry because they will create some. The former Jedi arrives and announces himself formally to the Mandalorians. He tells them they stand accused and offers terms: surrender and receive fair treatment, or fight and face swift justice. The Mandalorians refuse, and battle erupts. More than half the Jedi are killed alongside all Mandalorians except one, with that survivor being Jango Fett, who kills multiple Jedi with his bare hands. The comic shows the Count standing silently among the dead afterward. Another surviving Jedi asks what they have done, but he does not answer, showing no sign of doubt or regret. Then, the surviving Jedi handed Jango over to captivity. Led by the Count, they delivered Jango to the governor of Galidraan, and Jango later recounts what happened. The official sold him to a spice transport crew, where he spent years in forced labor. The comic confirms that the Count was present when Jango was handed over. The Galidraan disaster reveals an even darker pattern. In Legends continuity, the Count also abandoned his own Padawan, Kamari Vosa, leaving her to die in the battle. Vosa survived, but fell to the dark side, becoming the murderous leader of the Bando Gora cult. Years later, when her dark side activities threatened his plans, the Sith Lord solved the problem by arranging her assassination through Jango Fett. He created his own monster, then coldly eliminated her when she became inconvenient, just as he would later dispose of Ventress and other pawns. 10 years later, reporting to Sidious as Darth Tyranus, he reflects on Galidraan by calling it a misguided mission from the start. He recites the casualty figures without visible grief, while reporting Jango's captivity as fact rather than tragedy. He uses passive construction, explaining the Jedi were forced to hand him over. When Jango confronts him directly, Tyrannis admits it was a disaster for all of them, while acknowledging he was misguided. He calls it the last of his foolish errands for the Senate and the Jedi. Jango's response cuts through the rhetoric. He notes that this does not sound like an apology, and he is absolutely right, because the Count never actually apologizes. He barely acknowledges what happened at Galidraan, and when he does mention it, the words serve tactical purposes in negotiation rather than confession. When recruiting Jango for the clone army, He admits the clones will be instrumental in the destruction of the Jedi. Jango responds that this is what he is counting on. Both men are united by their hatred of the Order that wronged them, and neither acknowledges the moral weight of what they are creating. The Sith had been planning his fall for decades. The Legends novel Darth Plagueis reveals that Galidraan was not an accident. Plagueis exposes that what occurred on Galidraan had been clear evidence of the dark side acting in concert with Sith plans. Plagueis himself had directed the conflict, in partnership with the local governor and Death Watch members, to lure the Jedi into a hopeless confrontation with the true Mandalorians. Most importantly, the conflict had a devastating effect on the Jedi Master by deepening his split with the High Council regarding its decisions to deploy the Jedi as warriors. 20 years earlier, Plagueis had seen the stirrings of the dark side in him and had attempted to bring those latent powers to the surface whenever possible. At Galidraan, at Yinchor and Malastare, and most recently through Sidious's efforts at Azmardu and Eriadu, the Sith had been manipulating the Count toward darkness for decades. According to Legends sources, he protested to the Council after another deadly mission. He urged them to consider their responsibility to the Jedi as well as to the Republic, while expressing concern that they allowed themselves to serve without question. He argued that yes, the Bando Gora were criminals, but was it not criminal to waste the lives of Jedi on missions that were obviously doomed from the start? The sourcebook notes the irony. As sincere as the protest may sound, it may be nothing more than a testament to his legendary charisma. 12 years after Galidraan, he recruited Jango Fett as the template for the clone army that virtually eliminated the Jedi Order. The lesson he took from Galidraan was not that violence is wrong. He learned that the Jedi Council sends its people to die based on lies, that the Order can be manipulated by corrupt officials, and that the Republic system weaponizes the Jedi against the wrong targets. His solution was not pacifism or reform, but finding better masters and better soldiers. In canon sources, he declares that the Jedi must take control because the Senate has been corrupted. His vision shows Jedi storming the Senate and killing Palpatine in a twisted version of what he believes is necessary. His disillusionment reached its peak in the killing of his best friend. His frustration with institutional failure builds throughout canon sources as he watches the Senate refuse to help Serenno, insisting that because his brother failed to pay levies, the planet is on its own. When the Council refuses to intervene, they tell him he must respect their wishes and the wishes of the Senate. This pattern of watching institutions fail to protect the vulnerable fuels his belief that only force and control can bring order. The pattern reaches its end in Labyrinth of Evil, when Sidious orders him to kill Sifo Dyas as a test of commitment. One of his former confidants at the Jedi Temple has perceived the coming change, Sidious tells him, but Master Sifo Dyas cannot stand it. The Count obeys without hesitation. With the killing of Sifo Dyas, he embraces the dark side fully. The friend who had told him he was more Jedi than anyone else becomes his final sacrifice to the Sith. For the fifth reason, his ideology was explicitly fascist. The novelization provides the clearest statement of his political vision. The narrative describes that he envisioned a government clean, pure, and direct, with none of the messy scramble for the favor of ignorant rabble and subhuman creatures that made up the Republic he despised. The government he would serve would be authority personified, specifically human authority. The book continues with explicit human supremacism. It was no accident that the primary powers of the Confederacy were Neimoidian, Skakoan, Quarren and Aqualish, Muin and Gossam, Seamirthian, Kurivar, and Geonosian. At war's end, the aliens would be crushed and stripped of all they possessed. Their systems and wealth would be given into the hands of the only beings who could be trusted with them: human beings. The Count would serve an empire of man. His vision for the Jedi was equally authoritarian. He would destroy the Order to create it anew, not shackled by the corrupt, narcissistic, shabby little beings who called themselves politicians. Instead, they would be free to bring true authority and true peace to a galaxy that badly needed both. An order that would not negotiate or mediate, but simply act, imposing his vision of proper society on a galaxy he viewed with aristocratic contempt. The Sith Lord believed one powerful man could solve everything. Legend sources document his authoritarian impulses throughout. He tells Palpatine that one man should be able to make a difference if he is powerful enough, while suggesting perhaps disbanding the Senate entirely for a period of time. He believes the Jedi could fulfill ancient prophecies on their own if they were willing to unleash the full powers of the Force. Sources provide his Sith ideology directly. To know the dark side, one had to be willing to rise above all morality, to throw love and compassion aside, and to do whatever is necessary to bring about the vision of a world brought under control, even if that meant taking lives. His contempt for democracy appears throughout the sources. In the novelization, the narrative explains that a man of such heritage and principle could never stoop to be lord of a garbage heap, chief of a horde of scavengers squabbling over scraps. The Republic, to him, was nothing more than this. His criticism of the Jedi was never that they were too authoritarian, but that they were not authoritarian enough to impose proper order. Even his personal habits reflect these authoritarian tendencies. Sources note that he had a meticulous nature. He liked cleanliness and order so much that his quarters at the temple were kept pristine, everything sleek and shining, glass and metal, as though nothing had ever been touched. His environment reflects his emotional coldness and need for absolute control. In terms of the sixth reason, despite his intelligence, the Count was Sidious's most naive apprentice. He genuinely believed he would rule alongside Palpatine after the war ended. In sources, he tells his master it is tiring to play the villain for so long. He finds himself looking forward to an honorable captivity that would allow him to sit out the rest of the war in comfort. He planned to give up his former allegiances and bind himself to the new government with his reputation for integrity and idealism fully intact. Sources reveal the depth of his delusion. He considered this their star of destiny for many years while planning to serve the new empire as only he could, as he was born to. He had no doubt that Skywalker would fall because his master never lost. He was the very definition of unbeatable. The aristocrat allowed himself to relax enough to imagine the outcome. When he contemplated the grand finale of Sidious's decades of work, his eyes even misted with emotion as he thanked the Chancellor for the opportunity. He admitted finding himself somewhat overcome. Sidious had always viewed him as temporary. The Sith Lord never understood Sith dynamics because when Sidious orders Anakin to kill him, he is stunned. Sources capture his confusion about whose side Palpatine was on. Even at the very end, he hopes that Palpatine has not betrayed him, that everything has been proceeding according to plan. He cannot comprehend that he was never the plan. Legend sources reveal what Sidious actually thought of his apprentice. The Dark Lord considered him a powerful placeholder while waiting for Anakin to mature. The Count had the talent and could serve a purpose, but the seemingly guileless, pleasant-faced boy was the one Sidious would take as his true apprentice to execute the final stage of the grand plan. Plagueis' assessment was even harsher. The fallen Jedi might have made a powerful partner under different circumstances, except for the fact that he would never be content to serve as a mere apprentice or assassin. He would demand to become a true Sith, and that would lead to trouble. The solution was to let him find his own way to the dark side, to let him leave the Order of his own accord and become the benevolent spokesperson for the disenfranchised, to let him persuade worlds and systems to secede and start a civil war. He was always meant to be discarded. Legend sources contain Sidious's private writings about his apprentices. The Book of Sith reveals that Sidious refers to the Count as a servant rather than as a partner. He lumps him together with bounty hunters as merely useful resources. Most devastating is his annotation of Darth Bane's writings about the Rule of Two. Sidious writes that while he may choose apprentices, he will never choose a successor. He intended to defeat death itself and rule forever. The aristocrat was never meant to inherit anything. Sidious was always training replacements. Bane's own warnings went unheeded, as the ancient Sith Lord wrote that an apprentice must grow in strength and skill until they can surpass the master, with anything else being regression. He advised training multiple candidates at once while letting them defeat one another and betray one another, with only the strongest surviving. Sidious took this further by always training replacements, ensuring the Count was never secure. Sources reveal that he believes himself an accomplice and an equal. He thinks Sidious had recognized in him the makings of a true accomplice, an equal from the other camp who was already trained in the Jedi arts, a master duelist, a political visionary. But Sidious had continued to hold him at arm's length, perhaps working with other potential replacements. The Sith Lord never realizes the truth, that Darth Maul had been nothing more than a minion, like Ventress and Grievous. The implication is clear. He is the same. Now for the seventh and final reason. His death scene reveals the complete collapse of everything he believed. The novelization shows how he does not understand what is happening until he hears Palpatine praising Anakin. He hears Palpatine's voice and realizes that his doom is approaching. From then on, the aristocrat understands that everything has been going to plan, just not his plan. This had been a Jedi trap, but the Jedi were not the target, but the bait. He realizes he was always just a tool. As he looks up at Anakin Skywalker for the final time, he knows he has been deceived for many years. He has never been the true apprentice or the heir to Sith power. His whole life becomes meaningless in that moment. All his victories, all his struggles, all his heritage, all his principles and sacrifices, everything he has done and owns and been, all his dreams and grand vision for the future empire and the army of the Sith, have only been a pathetic sham. All of them, all of him, add up only to this. He has existed only to be the victim of Anakin Skywalker's first cold-blooded killing. After the lightsabers cross at his throat, the Count finally meets his end. The man who categorized all beings as either assets or threats realizes in his final moments that he was neither. His decades of combat experience and mastery of swordplay become irrelevant. His wealth, political influence, and aristocratic background mean nothing. The irony is that those closest to him saw the truth. Rael Averross, one of his former apprentices, told him the truth years earlier. He explained that the light is not chosen because one wants to win, but is chosen because it is the light. Lorien Nod's prophecy to young Dooku also came true. Lorien told him he would never be a Jedi, and neither would he. The Count would never be a great Jedi Master. He dismissed this at the time, thinking he would let Lorien have the last word because why not, since he had the career while Lorien had nothing. But Lorien was right. Count Dooku was not a tragic figure corrupted by the dark side, but a man who never developed the capacity for genuine human connection. He saw all beings as tools or obstacles, dressed his hunger for power in noble rhetoric, and died discovering that the master manipulator had been manipulated from the beginning. The story he told himself about principled idealism was always a lie that even he, in his weaker moments, only almost believed. The sources make clear that his path was not a fall, but a revelation, as the Sith did not corrupt him, but simply offered permission to be what he always was. In canon sources, Master Costana worried that his innate darkness was merely waiting for an outlet. Even Yoda later reflected that the Count's embrace of evil was a choice made, not something Sidious forced upon him. What he was, from childhood to his final breath, was someone incapable of caring about anything except what others could do for him or to him. Till in the end, Sidious did something to him by discarding him like the tool he had always been. But knowing what Dooku was tells only half the story. The darkness didn't arrive fully formed. It was built, piece by piece, across more than a century of choices, wounds, and betrayals. It started on Serenno, with a child abandoned on palace grounds in the middle of the night, whose father saw his force sensitivity not as a gift, but as a problem to be gotten rid of. Count Dooku's rise and fall is one of the most tragic stories in Star Wars. For decades, he stood among the greatest Jedi, training Qui-Gon Jinn and fighting alongside Master Yoda. But in the end, this same noble master abandoned everything he believed in, becoming Darth Tyranus and leading the Separatists in a war that tore the Republic apart. Born in 102 BBY on the wealthy world of Serenno, Dooku was heir to vast armies and unlimited wealth. His parents, Count Gora and Countess Anya, ruled their planet with absolute authority and expected their son to continue their legacy. Everything changed when baby Dooku began showing force powers before he could even walk. His family didn't celebrate this gift, they feared it. Count Gora viewed his force-sensitive son as a political liability, not a blessing. So he made a choice that would haunt both father and son forever. Late one night, Gora abandoned his infant child on the palace grounds and contacted the Jedi Order. A Jedi seeker found the baby at the forest's edge and took him to Coruscant. The Jedi severed all ties to his royal bloodline, raising him within their ancient traditions. This abandonment scarred Dooku for life. Born into privilege but raised by humble monks, he lived with constant tension between his noble heritage and the Jedi's simple teachings. No matter how hard he tried to belong, Dooku always carried the wound of his family's rejection. His siblings, Ramil and Jenza, inherited the home and title that should have been his. Yet those childhood dreams of returning to Serenno never died. One day, those dreams would pull him back home, not as the rightful heir his family had cast aside, but as a dark lord of the Sith determined to destroy everything they had built. Note, this script follows canon continuity, using select Legends material to fill logical gaps. Young Dooku. Young Dooku quickly became the most gifted student at the Jedi Temple. His polite manners earned him both respect and teasing from the other younglings, who jokingly called him His Excellency because he acted so proper. He had no idea where this behavior came from, since the Jedi had never told him about his royal birth. What made Dooku really special was his incredible force sensitivity. While other children struggled with basic exercises, Dooku could sense emotions from people 3 floors away. Sometimes he even caught glimpses of future events during meditation. His telekinesis was so precise, he could lift dozens of objects at once and arrange them into perfect patterns. He could run through the temple's training courses blindfolded because he sensed dangers before they happened. Master Yoda noticed this remarkable child and decided to watch him closely. Even as a child, Dooku's mind worked differently from his peers. Late at night, while other students slept, he would sneak into the restricted archives. Surrounded by ancient scrolls and holocrons, he filled secret journals with questions about things others took for granted. This pattern of questioning authority would define his entire relationship with Jedi rules. His first real friendship was with another outcast student, Sifo Dyas. This pale, sickly boy was cursed with an unusual gift. Without warning, Sifo Dyas would sometimes collapse, his eyes rolling back as visions of possible futures flooded his mind. Other children found these fits frightening and avoided him. Yet Dooku felt oddly drawn to this boy who could see what others couldn't. They spent hours together in the archives, studying ancient Jedi history and discussing big ideas while other children played training games. Sifo Dyas would describe his visions in terrifying detail, seeing murky flashes of a great war consuming the galaxy. Though the images were broken and scary, the Jedi Masters dismissed these episodes as nothing more than fever dreams. However, Dooku trusted that his friend was seeing genuine visions of the future. As Dooku's training with Master Yoda intensified, their missions across the Republic often revealed corruption and injustice that frustrated the Padawan. When Dooku urged more direct action against obvious wrongdoing, Yoda gently reminded him that the Jedi serve the Republic as it is. According to the ancient master, trying to fight every injustice would spread them too thin to be effective anywhere. On the surface, Dooku nodded and accepted Yoda's guidance. Inside, he remained unconvinced, and that frustration would only grow stronger as the years passed. Around 90 BBY, when Dooku was about 12 years old, something important happened that would deepen his connection to his lost family. He went on a mission to Serenno during the planet's Festival of Light, where Master Yoda had been assigned to settle a fight between noble houses, and brought young Dooku along for the experience. Walking through the capital city's streets during the festival, Dooku found himself drawn to the massive Castle Serenno that ruled the skyline. He stood mesmerized, staring at ancient towers that seemed familiar despite never having seen them before. Accompanied by Sifo Dyas, Dooku eventually met a pair of local children around his age. There was a girl named Jenza and a boy named Ramil, though none of them realized they were siblings. Jenza excitedly guided the Offworlders to see some ancient carvings, taking them into Serenno's Great Assembly Hall, where images of great white dragons were carved into the walls. As Jenza pointed out a carving of a dragon, she eagerly told the local legend. Supposedly, a great white dragon called the Tirataka was bound to Serenno's royal bloodline and would call the rightful heir home in times of need. When Dooku reached out and touched the etching, he was hit by a sudden force vision, feeling the legend of Serenno's white dragon pressing on his destiny. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the children explored the assembly hall, a sudden earthquake struck. The stone ceiling began to collapse, and Dooku, Jenza, and Ramil became trapped under the falling rubble. Instinctively, young Dooku thrust out with the Force, straining to hold up the debris. But he couldn't do it alone. At the last second, Master Yoda arrived and added his powerful strength. Together, Master and Apprentice held back the wreckage and flung it aside, saving all three children from being crushed. Count Gora rushed in to investigate the noise, and his reaction was explosive. He instantly recognized Dooku as the son he abandoned years ago. In a fury, Gora revealed the boy's true heritage then and there. The revelation left Dooku completely devastated. He had finally found his family, only to learn that his own father saw him as a monster. Nearby, Jenza and Ramil stared at him in equal parts awe and fear, unsure how to even speak to their suddenly discovered brother. In that horrible moment, the white dragon from Dooku's dreams finally made sense. It had been the Tirataka calling him home, a vision calling him to a home that would never truly accept him. Late that night, Dooku sat alone in his quarters, pouring his confusion into his secret journal by candlelight. His pen scratched out painful questions. Why did the Jedi forbid family connections, when being torn from family had caused him such pain? His father's angry face hovered in his memory, the rage and fear in Count Gora's eyes upon realizing his forsaken son had returned. By his mid-teens, when Dooku was formally taken as Yoda's Padawan, he bore emotional wounds far deeper than any training injury. He knew exactly who he was and where he came from, and he knew that both his birth family and his Jedi family looked on him with distrust or fear. That painful knowledge forged him into a youth who would never again fully trust anyone. Instead, Dooku learned to rely only on his own strength and intellect. Under Yoda's guidance during his Padawan years, Dooku's abilities grew amazingly. By age 14, he had begun specializing in Form 2 lightsaber combat, also known as Makashi. This elegant, precise style focused on blade-to-blade dueling rather than deflecting blaster fire. Most considered it outdated, since the Sith had been gone for 1,000 years, but Dooku found himself drawn to its sophistication and control. When other Padawans questioned why he would study an outdated form, Dooku would explain that no knowledge was truly outdated. The galaxy changed constantly, and what seemed useless today might prove essential tomorrow. Master Yoda encouraged this specialization, perhaps sensing something in the Force that others missed. He spent hours training Dooku in Makashi's complicated footwork and precise blade angles. The boy proved a natural, his royal bearing perfectly suited to the form's elegant movements. During these training years, Master Yoda occasionally took Dooku to quiet meditation chambers for private lessons. One evening, when Dooku had been caught sneaking into restricted archives again, Yoda decided to address his student's restless curiosity directly. In the soft candlelight of the chamber, Yoda asked what Dooku was searching for in those forbidden texts. This question would reveal the depth of Dooku's intellectual hunger and his growing dissatisfaction with standard teachings. Hesitant but honest, Dooku confessed he had read about ancient Jedi who had left the Order. He asked Yoda pointedly why others had walked away if the Jedi code was perfect. Yoda's ears twitched at the question, and he replied with gentle wisdom that no code was perfect and no Jedi without flaws. When Dooku voiced his frustration about the Council dismissing Sifo-Dyas's visions, Yoda spoke about the dangers of interpreting unclear futures. The ancient master showed unexpected openness by producing an old holocron of Jedi prophecies, allowing Dooku to examine it while explaining that they must trust in the Force, yet they could not control it. As Dooku left that night, he thanked Yoda, but noted quietly that the busts of former Jedi in the hall intrigued him. After his student departed, Yoda stood there alone before those same busts of the Lost 19, sighing deeply. Much darkness existed in their history, and he prayed it would not claim another promising student. Rising Master. For 20 years, Dooku served the Republic brilliantly, but every mission revealed new cracks in the system he'd sworn to protect. Between 82 BBY and 62 BBY, Dooku completed countless missions across the galaxy, building a reputation that echoed through Jedi history. Each success added to his growing legend, while the polite manners that had earned him teasing as a child now commanded instant respect. When Jedi Knight Dooku entered a negotiation, fighters on both sides knew that a solution would come, one way or another. His diplomatic victories during this period became the stuff of temple legend. Dooku developed a different approach to solving conflicts that went beyond simple tasks. Rather than just sitting between two sides, he would study each group's history and problems. He understood their positions not just as politics, but as real pain that had built up over years. His strategies often challenged how other Jedi worked. Where most Jedi sought middle ground between opposing sides, Dooku often suggested completely changing the system that caused the problem in the first place. His mission reports frequently pointed out the real reasons conflicts started. These weren't the nice, polite reports the Council expected, yet they couldn't argue with his results. His willingness to make his own decisions troubled those who believed in following proper rules. They saw a young knight who was starting to trust his own thinking over what he'd been taught. During this period, Dooku's fighting abilities became legendary. He perfected Makashi into an art form, creating new moves that hadn't been seen since ancient times. By age 40, the Order acknowledged him as the greatest living master of Form 2. Additionally, he created his signature curved hilt lightsaber during this time, a design that gave him better control and power in duels. The weapon became so linked with him that later fighters who used curved hilts were said to be copying Dooku's style. This exhibition of skill was not mere showmanship. Dooku believed that the Jedi had grown lazy, their fighting skills deteriorating after 1,000 years without Sith enemies. He often argued that the Order focused too much on talking, while ignoring the combat training that real peacekeeping required. Consequently, his own training stayed intense, spending hours each day practicing techniques that most considered outdated. During training shows at the temple, Dooku would display advanced Makashi moves that left the watchers amazed. His blade work was beautiful and deadly, with each movement precise, efficient, and devastating. Younger knights would ask for private lessons, eager to learn from someone who had turned lightsaber fighting into high art. Dooku was picky about who he taught, training only those who showed real dedication to fighting excellence. Master Yoda occasionally watched these sessions, his face giving nothing away. The ancient Jedi Grand Master saw Dooku's amazing abilities, but sensed something troubling in his former student's growing confidence. After one particularly intense demonstration, Yoda approached him privately. Their conversation was brief but sharp, with Yoda expressing worry about Dooku's increasing focus on fighting skill over inner peace. Dooku's response revealed how his thinking was changing. He argued that peace without the strength to keep it was just an illusion waiting to be broken. The Jedi had grown soft, believing their reputation alone would prevent conflict. But history taught that only strength stopped aggression. The Order's refusal to accept this made them weak against enemies they couldn't imagine. The exchange was polite, but both masters saw the gap growing between them. Yoda valued humility and acceptance, while Dooku believed in preparation and decisive action. Neither would change the other's mind. Both hoped time might bring wisdom to the other's thinking. Around 85 BBY, a critical event shook Dooku's faith in the Council even further. Sifo Dyas had experienced another apocalyptic vision, this time about a remote agricultural world called Proto Branch. He burst into Dooku's quarters late one night, trembling after seeing the planet consumed by fire and famine in his dreams. Sifo described broken, urgent phrases about villagers screaming and fields turning to ash, begging Dooku to help him convince the Council. Dooku remembered how Sifo's past warnings had been dismissed and felt responsibility mixed with anger at the Council's conservatism. Together with Master Lenig Castana, who studied dark-side relics and sympathized with their concerns, they convinced Yoda to investigate, despite his initial reluctance. As they jumped to hyperspace, Dooku struggled with the politics of the situation versus doing what was right. They arrived at Proto Branch to find catastrophe in progress. A massive solar storm engulfed the planet's floating cities, killing thousands with blood-orange skies and choking smoke. Dooku leaped into action, leading locals in evacuation efforts and using the Force to shield civilians. Despite their desperate efforts, they couldn't save everyone from disaster. Later, as Dooku looked over devastated cities scattered with the remnants of what had been homes, he spoke with Castana through gritted teeth. They could have evacuated the cities if the Council had heeded Sifo's warnings. The Council feared inciting panic over uncertain prophecies, but Dooku's bitter response was that they now stood in the certainty of it. He found a tattered child's toy in the debris, clenching it as a symbol of lives that could have been saved. As the Council later discussed unknown variables and regrettable outcomes, Dooku's hands trembled with righteous anger. He replayed the screams of burning villagers in his mind and felt a new conviction harden. Never again would he stand by and let bureaucratic caution cost innocent lives. In his heart, Dooku's respect for the Council's authority died in those flames. It was replaced by a resolve that justice, swift and proactive, was worth bending the rules. Watching the sun set over Proto Branch's ashes, Dooku quietly vowed the Jedi would not fail like this under his watch. The tragedy at Proto Branch solidified Dooku's growing conviction that the Council's excessive caution enabled preventable suffering. This bureaucratic dismissal infuriated Dooku further, and he privately vowed never to let institutional caution outweigh justice again. His first Padawan, Rael Averross, came to him around 76 BBY. Rael presented as a brash young man with a thick frontier accent that marked him as an outsider among the more refined Coruscanti Jedi. Other masters had passed him over, considering him too rough around the edges for proper Jedi training. But Dooku saw potential in the young man's unconventional approach and raw determination. Their partner proved surprisingly successful. Where Dooku was refined and calculating, Rael was direct and intuitive. The young Padawan's informal manner initially frustrated Dooku, who expected the same rigid discipline he maintained. Over time, he came to appreciate how Rael's different perspective could reveal solutions he might have missed. Their relationship involved constant tension, since Rael's casual attitude toward authority clashed with Dooku's increasing belief in hierarchy and order. Whenever the young man questioned orders or suggested alternative approaches, Dooku would remind him sharply about the importance of discipline. These conflicts taught Dooku that training a Padawan required more patience than he naturally possessed. The partnership lasted nearly a decade. When Rael achieved knighthood around 66 BBY, Dooku felt an unexpected pang of emptiness as Rael Averross bowed and left to forge his own path. Training Rael had been an exercise in patience. The young man's drawling irreverence had tested Dooku daily. In Rael's unorthodox approach, though, Dooku had glimpsed perspectives beyond his own rigid discipline. In private, Dooku admitted to himself that he had grown fond of the scruffy Padawan. Seeing Rael go was bittersweet. pride in his growth, but also a hollow realization. Dooku thrived in the role of mentor, of shaping a Jedi in his image. Then came Qui-Gon Jinn. Dooku selected him as his second Padawan around 68 BBY, when the boy reached approximately 12 years old. Qui-Gon embodied everything the Council found problematic. He was impulsive, emotional, and prone to challenging authority. Other masters had passed him over during several selection ceremonies, considering him too difficult to train properly. Some suggested sending him to one of the service corps, believing he lacked the discipline for knighthood. Dooku saw something else entirely, someone like himself who questioned the Order's assumptions. During Qui-Gon's initiate trials, he had repeatedly achieved his objectives through unconventional means. When faced with difficult tests, other initiates would attempt traditional solutions, while Qui-Gon would find creative alternatives that accomplished the goal through unexpected approaches. Their first meeting as Master and Padawan revealed the nervous uncertainty that marked the beginning of their partnership. When Dooku formally accepted Qui-Gon as his apprentice, the 12-year-old boy presented himself with obvious anxiety. He confessed his fear of not being worthy of such an accomplished master's attention, having been passed over by others so many times before. Dooku, recognizing the boy's potential and his need for reassurance, responded with careful encouragement. He explained that worthiness wasn't measured by conformity, but by the courage to think independently while maintaining discipline. Their relationship would require patience from both master and student as they learned to work together. Here was a student who wouldn't simply accept teachings, but would challenge and explore them. Their partnership would last approximately a decade and would profoundly shape both men. The early years showed a relationship more akin to father and son than typical master and Padawan. Despite standing roughly 2 decades apart in age, Dooku became the parental figure Qui-Gon never had. He taught the boy not just combat and force techniques, but how to think independently, how to question without being disrespectful, and how to maintain one's own convictions while working within a system. During one significant mission around 60 BBY, Dooku and Qui-Gon traveled to resolve a kidnapping case involving a senator's son. They discovered that the apparent criminals were actually desperate villagers who had been systematically oppressed by Senator Dagonet's corrupt policies. When Dagonet arrived with security forces demanding his son's return while ordering the Jedi to arrest the terrorists, Dooku's patience snapped. He used the Force to lift the corrupt politician by the throat, his eyes cold with righteous fury. Dooku declared that perhaps the galaxy would be better off without those who polluted it with greed and cruelty. Qui-Gon stepped forward. Alarmed by his master's display of dark side power, he pleaded with Dooku to stop, saying this wasn't the Jedi way. The sight of a young boy witnessing this violence also helped break Dooku's spell of rage. He released the senator, who collapsed gasping, then coldly dictated terms for the child's return. Dagonet would meet the villagers' demands for food and credits. That evening, by their campfire, Qui-Gon respectfully but boldly questioned his master about what had happened. He admitted that Dooku had frightened him, and while his heart agreed with why Dooku acted, he couldn't accept how. That night, as the fire crackled low, Dooku regarded Qui-Gon's earnest, worried face. A surge of affection and regret welled in him. Affection for the Padawan's pure heart. Regret that such a heart might be broken by the galaxy's harsh truths. Dooku's voice, when he warned Qui-Gon he'd have to choose between the Council and his conscience someday, was gentle. Inside, though, Dooku felt a stab of cynicism. Qui-Gon still believes the Council embodies the light. Dooku knew better now. In time, he'll see, Dooku thought sadly. The Jedi can be as blind as that senator. As Qui-Gon went to his bedroll, Dooku stared into the darkness, wrestling with shame. He had nearly killed a man in anger, yet he felt justification. That man deserved it. In his heart, Dooku did not regret forcing justice on the senator. He only regretted frightening his Padawan. Am I falling to darkness, he wondered, or finally seeing clearly? Years before their ultimate confrontation on Serenno, Dooku had already experienced his first brush with the dark side during a mission to the remote world of Asusto. He had joined his friend Sifo Dyas and Master Lennox Castana to investigate reports of Sith artifacts hidden in the planet's ancient cave systems. The Presagers of Hecate, a dark cult that worshipped forgotten Sith teachings, had laid an elaborate trap for any Jedi who came seeking the artifacts. During the exploration of the underground temple, Dooku became separated from his companions and was captured by the robed cultists. They dragged him to the center of their ritual chamber, restraining him while eerie chants echoed through the stone corridors. The Presagers subjected Dooku to a nightmarish vision ritual, forcing dark prophecies into his mind. He saw flashes of a terrible future, galactic war consuming countless worlds, armies marching under foreign banners, and the familiar white dragon of his family's crest looming over scenes of destruction. Most disturbing of all, he witnessed Jedi falling by the thousands, while a shadowy figure orchestrated their doom from behind the scenes. Overwhelmed by these visions of catastrophe and the cultists' continued torment, Dooku felt fear and rage building beyond his ability to control. At the ritual's climax, when the Presagers attempted to complete whatever dark ceremony they had planned, his emotions erupted through the Force in a way he had never felt before. Force lightning burst from his fingers with devastating power, knocking his captors away and leaving their bodies smoking on the chamber floor. When Master Castana and Sifo Dyas arrived moments later, they found Dooku freed from his bonds but deeply shaken by what he had done. He had killed using dark side power, crossing a line that no Jedi should ever cross. The aftermath proved almost as significant as the event itself. Master Castana, known for her unconventional studies of Sith lore, performed a cleansing ritual with ceremonial arm wraps to help Dooku center himself in the light once more. During their journey back to Coruscant, though, Dooku confided his growing doubts to her. He wondered why the Force would show him such terrifying visions, and why darkness felt so natural when he needed power most. Castana's response planted seeds that would grow over the following decades. She warned him that the dark side was tempting precisely because it offered quick solutions to complex problems. She also suggested, though, that the Council's rigid approach to such matters left Jedi ill-prepared to face ancient evils that lurked in the galaxy's shadows. Following the incident on Asusto, Dooku spent days wrestling with the implications of what he'd experienced. In the privacy of his quarters, he flexed his fingers, recalling the crackle of lightning that had burst from them. The power had come so effortlessly in his moment of need, and it had saved lives. That truth gnawed at him. The Council's dogma said such power was of the dark side, to be shunned, but Dooku couldn't forget how natural it felt, nor how Master Castana's arcane knowledge had arguably done more good than the Council's ignorance. If the Force granted him the vision of the Tirataka and the might to destroy the cultists, perhaps it was sanctioning his actions. For the first time, Dooku entertained a dangerous notion. The Jedi's strict binary of light versus dark might be limiting their understanding of the Force. He kept these musings secret, but they took root deep in his mind and would grow over time. This experience marked the beginning of Dooku's questioning of orthodox Jedi teaching. If the Council couldn't prepare him for encounters with the dark side, perhaps their wisdom wasn't as complete as they claimed. The visions continued to haunt him, seeming more like prophecy than nightmare, as the galactic tensions increased over the following years. On the journey back to Coruscant, Qui-Gon carefully asked him about what had happened. Dooku's response was calm but chilling. He explained that sometimes fear was the only language certain people understood, that the code protected evil as much as good when applied without wisdom. If fear was the only thing that would make a man act justly, then fear was a legitimate tool. These weren't standard Jedi teachings, and they shaped Qui-Gon into the maverick he would become. Where Dooku's philosophy led toward controlling outcomes through power, Qui-Gon developed his own path based on trusting the living Force to guide him toward the right action, regardless of rules or expectations. When Qui-Gon finally stood ready for his trials around 58 BBY, Their relationship had evolved into something approaching equals. The young man had grown into everything Dooku hoped, yet feared. He was brilliant, independent, compassionate, but also determined to follow his own path rather than Dooku's vision. In the temple gardens at night, after Qui-Gon passed his trials, Master and former student walked among slowly glowing lanterns and carefully tended plants. Dooku praised Qui-Gon as the most capable and compassionate Jedi of his generation, while Qui-Gon expressed gratitude for extraordinary teaching. They discussed the prophecy of the Chosen One and their different perspectives on the Force. Qui-Gon believed in following the living Force's guidance, while Dooku preferred understanding the bigger picture. Dooku encouraged Qui-Gon to trust his instincts and not fear standing apart from the Council when necessary. As their conversation ended, Dooku placed a hand on Qui-Gon's shoulder and called him friend rather than Padawan for the first time. After Qui-Gon departed, Dooku remained alone in the garden, reflecting that the closest thing he'd ever had to a son was now walking his own path. During the same period in the 60s BBY, though, another mission would test Dooku's faith in the Council even further. On a joint assignment to Raxus Secundus, Dooku worked alongside fellow Master Mace Windu to investigate the death of Jedi Master Katri. Dooku discovered that the local senator's own security forces had conspired in the murder, part of a larger corruption scheme. During the confrontation with the perpetrators, Dooku killed one of the conspirators rather than allow him to escape with crucial evidence. His instincts proved correct. They had uncovered a major corruption ring, though his methods violated Jedi protocols about using lethal force. Mace Windu, who had followed procedures strictly throughout the mission, criticized Dooku's aggressive approach. When they returned to Coruscant, the Council praised both masters for their success, but showed clear preference for Windu's by-the-book methods. Soon after, Windu received an appointment to the High Council, while Dooku was passed over despite his superior investigative work. This pattern would repeat throughout Dooku's career. His results were appreciated, but his methods were questioned. Political connections deepened significantly during this period. Unlike most Jedi who maintained professional distance from politicians, Dooku cultivated relationships with powerful senators and system governors. He attended state functions, remembered personal details about influential figures, and offered informal counsel on matters beyond his official mandate. He justified this as gathering intelligence that would help the Jedi better serve the Republic. Yet, in truth, he was building a network of allies who shared his vision of a more ordered galaxy. Around 82 BBY, when Dooku attended his mother's funeral on Serenno, he had hoped for some reconciliation with his birth family. Standing among the mourners during the ceremony, he watched as tensions erupted when a protester interrupted the proceedings. Without thinking, Dooku used the Force to stop the disruption, revealing his presence and his powers to everyone there. Count Gora's reaction was explosive when he realized his abandoned Force-sensitive son had returned. The aging nobleman publicly raged at him, denouncing Dooku as a freak who had brought nothing but shame to their noble house. Dooku endured the verbal assault without using the Force to defend himself, hoping that showing restraint might somehow bridge the gap between them. Unfortunately, his father's hatred ran too deep, and even his mother's death couldn't reconcile Gora to having a Force-sensitive child. Young Genza, who witnessed this confrontation, was both impressed by Dooku's composure and horrified by their father's cruelty. This shared trauma would later strengthen the secret correspondence between the siblings, as they both carried the wounds of Count Gora's toxic legacy. One such relationship developed with a young nobleman named Palpatine of Naboo. They first encountered each other at diplomatic receptions in the mid-60s BBY, where their initial conversations remained formal and philosophical, discussing the nature of power and governance. Palpatine showed remarkable insight for a young politician, asking questions that revealed deep understanding of the Republic's structural weaknesses. These discussions planted seeds that would bloom into darkness years later. Palpatine would present ideas about democracy representing the tyranny of the incompetent majority over the exceptional few. He wondered whether those with true vision found it exhausting to serve such a chaotic system. Dooku found himself agreeing more than he should have. He even voiced frustrations that the Jedi, gifted with the Force's clarity, still had to bow to the whims of those blind to anything beyond immediate wants. Their conversations had an intoxicating quality for Dooku. After each cordial debate with the young Palpatine, Dooku felt invigorated. At last, here was a politician who understood. Palpatine's frank observations that the Republic's bloated democracy strangled effective governance were ideas Dooku had mulled in solitude for years. Hearing them from a noble's lips was almost vindication. Dooku found himself lingering after formal receptions, drawn into hushed corner conversations with Palpatine about the rule of the incompetent majority. He was cautious. It would not do for a Jedi to overtly criticize the Senate. Yet Palpatine's probing questions made Dooku feel seen, as if the Naboo nobleman peered directly into his frustrations and agreed without judgment. What an ally he would make, Dooku mused one evening, surprised at the thought. On some level, Dooku realized he was beginning to trust Palpatine, a worldly statesman who shared his ideas of order and efficiency. In retrospect, it was a quiet seduction of philosophy. Dooku left each encounter more certain that people like he and Palpatine, with clear vision, were meant to guide the galaxy. Neither man revealed their full thoughts during these early encounters, but each recognized someone similar in the other. Palpatine saw in Dooku a Jedi growing disillusioned with the Republic's corruption, while Dooku saw in Palpatine a politician who understood that radical change was necessary. Their friendship would deepen over the years, and Dooku couldn't imagine how catastrophically it would end. By the year 44 BBY, Dooku had reached a critical juncture in his life and career. He was one of the Order's most respected masters, a teacher of successful Padawans, and a diplomat whose skills were legendary throughout the Republic. He was also a man whose faith in the system he had served had steadily eroded. He went through the motions of being a Jedi while privately believing the Order had lost sight of its true purpose. The year 44 BBY would bring the mission that would shatter what remained of Dooku's faith in the Jedi Order. The Battle of Galidraan would show him that the Order wasn't just passive in the face of injustice. It could be manipulated into becoming an active tool of evil. After Galidraan, there would be no going back. Battle of Galidraan. Galidraan was the day Dooku realized the Jedi could be killers for hire. The mission to Galidraan in 44 BBY began like dozens of others Dooku had taken on. The planetary governor requested Jedi help to deal with Mandalorian insurgents threatening civilian populations. The intelligence packet, delivered through official Republic channels, contained horrific images, murdered families, destroyed settlements, and evidence of Mandalorian armor at attack sites. The governor pleaded for immediate help before more innocents died. The Jedi Council reviewed the evidence quickly. The reports seemed clear-cut. Mandalorian terrorists were slaughtering civilians, while local security forces were overwhelmed. They selected Dooku to lead a task force, recognizing that Mandalorians would require experienced Jedi to defeat. The Council assembled 20 Jedi for this mission, with this larger force reflecting the serious threat they believed the Mandalorians posed. The journey to Galidraan took 3 days through hyperspace. During the flight, Dooku studied the intelligence reports with growing unease. Something felt wrong about the entire situation. The attack patterns appeared too obvious, the evidence too convenient. The Mandalorians were warriors, not terrorists, and they fought with honor codes that specifically prohibited attacking civilians. Though he voiced these concerns to his fellow Jedi, they dismissed them as overthinking. The evidence stood clear. Civilians kept dying, and their duties seemed obvious. Dooku's instincts were screaming that they were walking into something they didn't understand. Yet without concrete proof of deception, he couldn't justify abandoning the mission. The Force itself seemed to whisper warnings, but the warnings were vague and unclear. All he had were suspicions and doubts, nothing strong enough to override the Council's orders. They arrived at Galidraan to find the governor waiting with precise coordinates for the Mandalorian camp. He claimed his security forces had tracked the terrorists to a valley 60 kilometers from the capital, begging the Jedi to strike quickly while claiming the Mandalorians prepared for another massacre. The governor's performance was flawless, tears in his eyes as he described the murdered families, his voice breaking when he mentioned the children killed in the attacks. The Jedi found the Mandalorian camp exactly where promised. The true Mandalorians, led by a young commander named Jango Fett, stood armed and alert in defensive positions. Their lack of surprise at the Jedi's arrival should have served as another warning sign. Terrorists caught off guard don't form perfect defensive formations. These warriors had been expecting this confrontation. Dooku's former Padawan, Kamari Vosa, fought alongside the other Jedi in what would prove to be a traumatic experience that would later contribute to her fall to the dark side. What happened next remains one of the most controversial moments in Jedi history. Dooku stepped forward with his lightsaber deactivated, offering the Mandalorians a chance to surrender peacefully. He assured them they would receive a fair trial if they came willingly. It was the same offer he had made to dozens of criminal groups over the decades, and occasionally some had accepted. Jango Fett removed his helmet, revealing a young face hardened by years of combat. He was barely 25 years old, but carried himself with the authority of a veteran commander. He identified his force as the true Mandalorians, not terrorists, but professional soldiers hired legally by the planet's previous government to fight against the Death Watch, the actual terrorist organization the Jedi sought. Fett explained that they had been conducting a legitimate military campaign against the Death Watch when the current governor had seized power through a coup. Now the governor wanted them eliminated because they remained loyal to the legitimate government he had overthrown. They had committed no crimes against civilians. Every action had been taken against military targets in accordance with Mandalorian honor codes. The tension reached a breaking point when violence erupted suddenly. From the Jedi perspective, the Mandalorians' refusal to surrender constituted resistance to lawful authority. From the Mandalorian viewpoint, 20 Jedi arriving in battle formation meant execution regardless of guilt or innocence. When combat began, both sides fought with everything they had. Amid the chaos of battle, Dooku parried another Beskar spear and felt a cold dread take hold. 11 Jedi already lay motionless in the snow, and each time his blade met the Mandalorian's furious assault, Dooku's certainty grew. This should not be happening. Between clenched teeth, he replayed his earlier suspicions, the too convenient evidence, the Council's haste. They had been deceived, he realized. This understanding became clear as he locked eyes with a dying knight who looked to him for guidance he did not have. For the first time in his life, Dooku felt betrayed, not by an enemy, but by his own order's blindness. They led us into a massacre. A righteous anger swelled in him even as he fought for survival. This wasn't anger at the brave warriors before him, but at the council chambers light years away, where comfortable masters had dispatched them based on lies. In that moment, on Galidraan's blood-stained field, Dooku's faith in the Council shattered completely. The Mandalorians used flamethrowers to create walls of fire that disrupted Jedi concentration, employed sonic weapons that disoriented Force senses, and used their jetpacks for three-dimensional mobility that made them difficult to pin down. Most effectively, they used projectile weapons, slug throwers whose bullets couldn't be deflected like blaster bolts, forcing Jedi to dodge rather than redirect. The Jedi suffered terribly as well. 11 of the 20 Jedi fell to Mandalorian weapons and tactics. These were experienced knights and masters, not younglings on their first mission. Their deaths proved that even the most skilled Force users could be overwhelmed by superior tactics and desperate courage. Dooku himself fought Jango Fett in single combat while the battle raged around them. The young Mandalorian proved to be perhaps the most skilled opponent Dooku had faced in decades. Fett's combination of jetpack mobility, wrist weapons, and pure tactical brilliance created a fight unlike any in Dooku's experience. The Mandalorian didn't fight like a Jedi or a common criminal. Instead, he fought like a professional soldier who had studied his enemy carefully. During their duel, as they exchanged blows and counters, Fett shouted over the combat that the governor had set up everything. The duel ended when Dooku used the Force to disable Fett's jetpack mid-flight, sending him crashing to the ground with bone-breaking force. The impact shattered several of Fett's ribs and fractured his left arm. Standing over the defeated Mandalorian commander, lightsaber at his throat, Dooku demanded proof of these claims. Fett's response, gasped through broken ribs and blood, was to provide coordinates of mass graves where the governor's forces had dumped the bodies of his political opponents, the same murders that had been blamed on the Mandalorians. He gave dates, times, and names of witnesses who could verify that the true Mandalorians had been nowhere near these atrocities. He begged Dooku to investigate before more innocent soldiers died. It was too late. The battle had already ended with complete Mandalorian defeat. The valley lay littered with bodies, true Mandalorian warriors who had fought to the last, and 11 Jedi who had expected an easy victory against terrorists. The snow had turned red with blood, and the Force itself seemed to recoil from the violence that had occurred. Only Jango Fett survived among the Mandalorians, and only because Dooku wanted answers. As Dooku stood in the makeshift field brig where Jango sat injured and bound, watching Republic forces bag bodies, their eyes met across a chasm of mutual tragedy. Jango's gaze burned with hate, while Dooku's carried wary sorrow. Dismissing the guards to speak privately, Dooku admitted softly that they had been deceived. The Mandalorian warriors had died fighting for truth, while the Jedi couldn't see it. Jango spat back that 11 Jedi had also died because of Dooku's blindness, calling him an outsider in the Mandalorian language. Dooku surprised the prisoner by apologizing, an unprecedented move for a Jedi master to a captured combatant. Dooku told Jango he would carry this failure forever. Jango's bitter response was that Dooku should carry it to his grave, since it wouldn't bring back the butchered Mandalorians. When the governor arrived to take custody of the prisoner, Dooku tried to ensure Jango would be treated as a prisoner of war rather than a criminal. The governor's smug assurance that justice would be done left Dooku watching helplessly as Jango was led away in shackles. Over the following weeks, as Dooku investigated Fett's claims about mass graves and faked evidence, the horrible truth emerged. The intelligence reports had indeed been falsified. The murdered civilians shown in the holographic evidence were political dissidents killed by the governor's own forces, not victims of Mandalorian attacks. The true Mandalorians had been legitimate soldiers fighting against actual terrorists, manipulated into a position where the Jedi would eliminate them for a corrupt politician. When the last piece of evidence clicked into place, testimony of how the governor of Galidraan himself orchestrated the atrocities, Dooku sat alone in the archives, report in hand, and trembled with rage. Not the hot rage of battle, but a cold, existential fury. The Jedi Council, in its proud eagerness to do good, had slaughtered innocents and loyal soldiers. They had allowed themselves to become murderers for a liar, he thought, each word a bitter knife. In that moment, the Jedi Order proved itself as blind and destructive as any tyrant, a truth Dooku could no longer ignore. The discovery that the Council had been manipulated into committing mass murder devastated Dooku's remaining faith. Every piece of evidence had been faked. The Jedi had served as unwitting executioners who eliminated honorable warriors protecting the legitimate governor from a usurper. 11 good Jedi had died for a lie, and the survivors would have to live with the knowledge that they had been tools of injustice. The governor sold Jango Fett into slavery immediately after the Jedi departed, keeping his Mandalorian armor as a trophy. This added one more injustice to the tragedy. The sole survivor of the massacre, a man who had fought honorably to defend his employers, was condemned to slavery while his people's killer profited from their deaths. The journey back to Coruscant became a nightmare. 11 Jedi bodies filled the cargo hold, while the surviving 9 Jedi were traumatized, several requiring immediate medical attention for physical and psychological wounds. Dooku sat quietly, writing his report and wrestling with the implications of what had occurred. Among the dead was a young Jedi Knight named Tra'an, who had looked up to Dooku throughout the mission. As the wounded lay dying on the snowy battlefield, Tra'an had whispered through blood-flecked lips, asking why this had happened, and if they had been truly protecting the innocent. Dooku had no answer then, and the weight of that dying man's confusion crushed down on him like the cold Galidraan air. Dooku spent the entire trip writing his report, each word increasing his fury at the system that had allowed this to happen. The report was scathing in its criticism. He didn't just blame the governor for his deception, he blamed the Senate for creating a system where such deception was possible, and he blamed the Jedi Council for being so eager to act that they hadn't properly investigated the situation. When Dooku presented his findings to the Jedi High Council 3 days after returning to Coruscant, the tension in the circular chamber was immediate. Standing in the center of the room, visibly exhausted but burning with controlled anger, he delivered excerpts from his damning report. The exchange that followed became legendary among those few who witnessed it. Dooku declared that they had become executioners for the corrupt, their eagerness to be heroes blinding them to obvious manipulation. 11 Jedi had died because they trusted a fundamentally broken system. Master Mace Windu leaned forward, arguing that they had no way to know the governor's information was false. Dooku's eyes flashed with barely contained rage, though, as he shot back that the way was to investigate, which none of them had done. They were eager for battle and blind to truth. Ki-Adi-Mundi interjected calmly that dwelling on what might have been wasn't the Jedi way. Dooku's bitter response was that a master learns from failure, or he courts it again. Master Yoda, watching from his seat with deep sadness, finally spoke about how dwelling on the past could lead to darkness. They must accept what happened and learn from it. Dooku walked out of the High Council chamber with his heart pounding. The faces of 12 masters remained behind him, stunned, disapproving, some even fearful. A small voice in Dooku wondered if he had gone too far. He had just rebuked Yoda himself. A louder voice within, though, one fueled by weeks of sleepless anguish, insisted he had spoken truth. As the ornate doors closed at his back, Dooku exhaled. Instead of regret, he felt an unexpected sense of relief. He had done what needed doing. They knew how he truly felt. In that instant, Dooku sensed he had reached a turning point. The Council's silence, their refusal to even acknowledge their responsibility, had cemented his disgust. They would change nothing, he realized. They would forget Galidraan to preserve their pride. The thought made his stomach turn. Standing alone in the corridor, Dooku knew he was now a Jedi in name more than belief. He realized he was no longer one of them, and surprisingly, he felt calm. The prospect was more liberating than frightening. He finally envisioned a future where he could act unbound by the Council's errors. That vision felt right. The Council's refusal to accept responsibility for their role in the Galidraan massacre broke something fundamental in Dooku's faith. How could they learn from it if they refused to acknowledge what it really meant? How could they prevent future manipulations if they wouldn't admit they had been manipulated? The Council seemed more concerned with maintaining the Order's reputation than confronting the systematic failures that had led to the massacre. With his faith in the Order shattered, Dooku withdrew almost entirely from active Jedi service between 44 BBY and 40 BBY. He returned to the temple physically, but was absent in every other way. He spent his time in study, delving deeper into both Jedi history and beginning to access restricted knowledge about the nature of the Force itself. His official reports from this period were brief and perfunctory, and he accepted no new Padawans despite the Council's suggestions. During these years of isolation, Dooku acquired various artifacts and holocrons through his growing network of contacts. He studied aspects of the Force that the Council preferred to keep restricted, not dark side techniques, not yet, but philosophical texts that questioned the division between light and dark. He read accounts from Jedi who had left the Order throughout history, finding that many had expressed the same frustrations he felt. One text particularly influenced him, writings from ancient Jedi who had left the Order around 2,000 years earlier. These sources described masters who wrote about the Force as a tool that went beyond moral categories, arguing that light and dark were artificial constructs created by those who feared power. According to these texts, the Jedi called some abilities dark not because they were inherently evil, but because they granted too much individual power, threatening the Order's control. Around 40 BBY, Dooku's growing criticism of the Council had become increasingly public. His speeches during Council debates became masterpieces of controlled fury. He would point out the hypocrisy of serving a corrupt Senate, of maintaining weapons while claiming to be peacekeepers, and of enforcing laws that protected the powerful while oppressing the weak. His words carried the weight of decades of experience and the authority of one of the Order's most accomplished members. The Council continued its path of cautious moderation, with some members privately agreeing with Dooku's criticisms but believing that working within the system remained the only viable option. Others, particularly Master Mace Windu, saw Dooku as a dangerous radical whose ideas could destroy the Order from within. The debates grew increasingly heated, with Dooku once declaring that the Jedi had become nothing more than glorified security guards for corrupt politicians. Around 32 BBY, Sifo Dyas, driven by his apocalyptic visions and Dooku's encouragement of independent action, secretly commissioned a clone army from the Kaminoans. He used his authority as a Jedi Master and Council member to initiate the project, believing this army would protect the Republic in the coming war. He didn't tell the Council, knowing they would stop him, and he didn't tell Dooku, no longer trusting his friend's intentions. Then came the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY, and with it, the death that would finally sever Dooku's last connection to the Jedi Order. The crisis began as a trade dispute, the kind of bureaucratic conflict the Senate should have resolved easily. The Trade Federation had blockaded Naboo over taxation disagreements, standard corporate strong-arming that happened regularly in the Outer Rim. This time, though, the situation escalated into full invasion. Battle droids marched through Naboo's cities, the peaceful population was herded into camps, and Queen Amidala, barely 14 years old, was forced to flee her own world. When Dooku learned that the Order had sent Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to negotiate, he felt a mixture of pride and concern. His former student stood as one of the few Jedi who might actually resolve the crisis through wisdom rather than violence. Qui-Gon had developed into exactly the kind of Jedi Dooku had hoped to create: independent, thoughtful, guided by the living force rather than politics. The mission went wrong from the start. The Trade Federation tried to kill the Jedi ambassadors with poison gas and destroyer droids, forcing Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to flee to the planet's surface. This should have been the Senate's wake-up call that something darker was happening, but the bureaucrats continued their debates while Naboo suffered. What followed became a sequence of events that confirmed all of Dooku's worst fears about the Republic and the Jedi's place in it. The Senate proved completely unable to respond to the crisis, paralyzed by procedure and corruption. Chancellor Valorum, one of the few honest politicians, was removed from office through a vote of no confidence orchestrated by Senator Palpatine. Meanwhile, the Jedi found themselves reduced to bodyguards for a teenage queen, unable to address the invasion's root causes. Dooku watched these events unfold from Coruscant with growing disgust. The Senate debated while children starved in camps. The Jedi Council sent 2 knights against an entire droid army. The Republic's response to naked aggression was forming committees and discussing trade regulations. It was Galidraan all over again, but on a planetary scale. Then, the revelation that changed everything arrived. The Sith had returned. The being who confronted Qui-Gon on Tatooine and later on Naboo proved undeniably a Sith Lord. The Dark Warriors the Jedi had believed extinct for 1,000 years had been operating in the shadows, orchestrating events the Order had remained blind to. The Trade Federation's invasion, the Senate's paralysis, even the decades of growing corruption, all of it might have resulted from Sith manipulation. The implications were staggering. If the Sith had returned, they had been working in secret for potentially generations, infiltrating the Republic's institutions while the Jedi remained complacent. Every failure of the Senate, every corrupt official the Jedi had been forced to serve, might have been part of a grand design to weaken the galaxy's defenses. The Order had been so confident in their victory 1,000 years ago that they had stopped looking for their ancient enemy. The duel in the Theed Palace power generator demonstrated careful Sith planning. The warrior called Darth Maul had received specific training to kill Jedi. His double-bladed lightsaber created attack patterns most Jedi had never encountered. His acrobatic fighting style overwhelmed traditional defensive forms. And most importantly, he had studied how to separate multiple Jedi opponents, dividing them to be conquered individually. When the energy barriers in the power generator separated Qui-Gon from Obi-Wan, Maul had his opportunity. The older Jedi, exhausted from prolonged combat, couldn't maintain his defense against the Sith's relentless assault. In a moment that would haunt the Order, Maul's blade pierced through Qui-Gon's torso with a simple thrust, a basic attack that succeeded because Qui-Gon had been worn down, isolated, and overwhelmed. Qui-Gon Jinn, perhaps the best of the Jedi, died because the Order hadn't prepared for an enemy they refused to believe could exist. His death wasn't heroic or meaningful. It was preventable, unnecessary, the result of the Order's unwillingness to see what Dooku had been warning against for years. When news of Qui-Gon's death reached Dooku, something inside him finally broke completely. He didn't attend the funeral on Naboo. He couldn't bear to stand with the council members who had failed to protect one of their finest, to listen to their platitudes about becoming one with the Force. Instead, he spent those days in the Hall of the Lost 19, staring at the bronzium busts of the Jedi Masters who had voluntarily left the Order before him. 19 Masters in thousands of years had found the courage to walk away. As Dooku studied each bust, reading their names and the dates of their departures, he recognized a pattern. Most had left during periods of galactic crisis, when the Order's failures proved most apparent. Master Fanius during the New Sith Wars, Master Alia during the Kans disorders, Master Tyranus during the Rhiannotus period. Each one had seen the Order fail in its essential purpose and chosen to seek a different path. Dooku spent 3 days in meditation, though it was unlike any meditation he had practiced before. There wasn't seeking peace or guidance from the Force. This was a systematic evaluation of his entire life, every choice that had led him to this moment. He reviewed every mission, every student he had trained, every compromise he had made in service to a broken system. The Republic was dying, consumed by corruption that had spread beyond any hope of healing. The Senate served only those wealthy enough to buy their votes. The courts protected the powerful while crushing the weak. The very democracy the Jedi defended had become a tool of oppression, more subtle but no less cruel than any dictatorship. The analysis led to a devastating conclusion about the Order itself. The Jedi Order had become willing accomplices to this system. They enforced unjust laws because they were laws. They protected corrupt senators because that was their mandate. They had grown so attached to their role as peacekeepers that they couldn't see they were keeping a peace that served only evil. Worse, their complacency had allowed the Sith to return and operate unopposed for who knows how long. The Jedi had become the very thing they claimed to oppose, servants of injustice who called their service righteous. Qui-Gon's death was the final proof that the Order had failed. They had sent him to negotiate with enemies they didn't understand, against a threat they couldn't perceive, in service of a government that didn't deserve loyalty. His death accomplished nothing. Naboo was freed, but the underlying corruption remained. The Sith had revealed themselves but disappeared again. The Senate continued its descent into dysfunction. 3 days after Qui-Gon's funeral, Dooku entered the council chambers for the last time. The circular room that had once represented wisdom and justice now seemed like a tomb where dead ideas received worship from blind fools. The 12 council members sat in their chairs, some meditating, others discussing trivial matters as if the galaxy hadn't just fundamentally changed. Dooku announced without preamble that he would leave the Order. The council members exchanged glances. Several had expected this moment for years. Master Yoda, having served as Dooku's teacher, had watched his growing disillusionment with deep concern. The ancient master urged Dooku to reconsider, suggesting that grief clouded his judgment, that Qui-Gon wouldn't want his death to drive Dooku from the light. Dooku's response was cold and precise. Grief hadn't clouded his judgment. It had clarified it. The Jedi had failed, and he would not participate in that failure any longer. The Order had become so obsessed with maintaining its traditions that it had forgotten its purpose. They served a corrupt republic because they always had, not because it was right. They avoided attachment while being completely attached to their own institutional survival. Master Mace Windu asked what Dooku intended to do after leaving. Would he join the agricultural corps? Would he become a private citizen? The questions carried an undertone of warning. Former Jedi were watched, their activities monitored to ensure they didn't misuse their training. Dooku didn't answer directly. He simply said he would find his own path to serve justice, not one constrained by the Council's limitations. The Force had given him power and wisdom. He would use them as he saw fit, not as outdated traditions demanded. The formal renunciation was brief. Dooku removed his lightsaber from his belt, the weapon he had carried for over 60 years. The curved hilt that had become his signature rolled slightly as he placed it on the floor of the council chamber, coming to rest at Yoda's feet. The symbolism was deliberate. He was returning the weapon to the master who had taught him, severing that connection completely. Master Yoda looked at the lightsaber with profound sadness. He made one final attempt to reach his former student, speaking about the dangerous path that lay ahead, warning that leaving the Order in anger could lead to darkness. Dooku had already made his decision. He turned and walked from the chamber without another word, never to return as a Jedi. At 70 years old, having served the Order for almost his entire life, Dooku had become the 20th master in the Order's history to voluntarily leave. The greatest test of his resolve lay ahead. This was the moment when Dooku's path would lead him to an encounter that would complete his transformation from disillusioned Jedi to Dark Lord of the Sith. The man who had spent 70 years serving the light was about to discover just how seductive the darkness could be when it promised the power to reshape a galaxy that desperately needed change. Architect of War. Qui-Gon's death wasn't just the end of a Jedi, it was the end of Dooku's faith. The decade between Dooku's fall to the dark side and the outbreak of the Clone Wars represents one of the most complicated deceptions in galactic history. During these 10 years, the newly christened Darth Tyranus operated on multiple levels at the same time. He worked publicly as the respected Count of Serenno, advocating for reform. Secretly, he served as a Sith Lord orchestrating rebellion. Most secretly of all, he acted as the hidden architect of both sides of a coming war. This deception would prove to be one of the most complex in galactic history. Few beings have ever successfully played so many roles at the same time. The moment that completed Dooku's transformation occurred very soon after he left the Order. After leaving Coruscant, he was approached by a figure who had been watching his growing disillusionment for years, Darth Sidious, still maintaining his public identity as Chancellor Palpatine. The meeting took place in an industrial section of Coruscant known as the Works. What Dooku didn't know was that Master Yaddle had followed him, sensing the dark presence that called to his former colleague. As Sidious appeared to Dooku as a Sith Lord for the first time, he didn't immediately reveal his identity as Palpatine, but Yaddle emerged from the shadows with her lightsaber ignited. The small Jedi Master's eyes filled with sadness as she declared she sensed the dark side and begged Dooku to step away from the shadowy figure. Sidious disappeared into the darkness, leaving Dooku to face his former colleague alone. For a moment, torn between his new path and old loyalties, Dooku tried to justify his choices by explaining that the Council was blind, and this path offered strength to save the galaxy from itself. Yaddle's compassionate response nearly broke his resolve. She reminded him it wasn't too late to return to the light, her words causing Dooku to hesitate as he remembered decades of respect for the wise master. Sidious's influence whispered through the Force, though, reminding him of every failure, every betrayal, every moment the Jedi had disappointed him. The duel that followed was brief but intense. Yaddle fought with the same acrobatic precision as her species was known for, flipping and spinning through the air while her green blade traced patterns of light. Dooku's superior reach and decades of Makashi training gave him the advantage. The moment came. Dooku crushed her beneath a heavy hangar door, mortally wounding the Jedi Master. As Yaddle lay dying beneath the twisted metal, she whispered words that would haunt him forever. With her last breath, she spoke of how the Jedi would never stop believing in him, even now. Tears streaming down his face, Dooku ignited his lightsaber and delivered what he told himself was a merciful killing blow. This act of murdering a respected colleague while she offered him redemption made his choice final and complete. In killing Yaddle, Dooku didn't just become a Sith. He became a man who could justify any evil in service of what he believed was a greater good. Sidious then stepped from the shadows and spoke the name that would define the rest of Dooku's life. He welcomed Lord Tyrannis, and Dooku's transformation was complete. What made this seduction so effective was that Sidious never asked Dooku to abandon his principles. Instead, he showed how those principles could be fulfilled through different methods. The galaxy needed order, the Sith could provide it. The corrupt needed to be punished, the dark side offered tools the Jedi refused to use. The weak needed protection, a strong ruler could ensure their safety better than democracy's chaos. When Dooku accepted the offer to become Darth Tyranus, he believed he was choosing a more effective path to the same goals he had always pursued. The fact that he was simply exchanging one master for another, one set of restrictions for different ones, wouldn't become apparent until it was far too late. First, there was one last piece of unfinished business from his Jedi past that needed tying up. Sidious informed his new apprentice that his old friend, Master Sifo Dyas, had become a liability. Sifo had already commissioned the clone army on Kamino without authorization, and his unpredictable visions made him dangerous to their plans. If the Jedi discovered his actions, their entire army could be exposed. The mission to eliminate Sifo Dyas took Dooku to Obadiah, where his oldest friend was negotiating with the Pikes. Dooku, using his new name Tyrannis, had already bribed the crime syndicate to shoot down Sifo's shuttle over the rocky moon. When the T-6 shuttle crashed in flames, Sifo Dyas survived long enough to crawl from the wreckage, only to find a hooded figure waiting for him. This marked the most terrible point of his transformation, the moment he irreversibly crossed the line by murdering someone who had loved and trusted him. There could be no redemption after this. Dooku had killed the one person who might have saved him from the darkness. Within months of his transformation, Dooku returned to Serenno openly for the first time in decades. The Great Council Chamber of Castle Serenno had changed a little since his childhood, its ancient stones bearing the carved symbols of House Dooku's thousand-year legacy. When he strode into that chamber wearing the dark robes of his new allegiance, though, everything changed forever. The Regent Council that he had installed after Rammel's death looked up in surprise as their former protector entered. Jenza rose from her seat with relief, moving to embrace the brother she hadn't seen in months. As her arms closed around him, though, she shivered involuntarily. Something cold and strange came from Dooku now, an aura that made her instinctively step back. When Dooku announced he had returned to claim his birthright as Count of Serenno, one proud noble, still loyal to Rammel's memory, dared to protest. The man's words died as Dooku's yellow eyes fixed on him, subtle force influence creeping into the noble's mind, and compelling agreement where reason had failed. One by one, the other council members felt the same overwhelming pressure, their eyes glazing slightly as they knelt and pledged fealty to Count Dooku. Jenza watched this display with growing horror, realizing that her brother had become something she no longer recognized. She remained silent, understanding that resistance would be futile against powers she couldn't comprehend. His first task after pledging himself to Sidious involved securing the clone army project that Sifo Dyas had initiated. Tyrannis systematically erased or altered records of his dead friend's involvement. Working through intermediaries and carefully managed payments, he ensured the Kaminoans understood that their contract now belonged to him. To them, he was simply the man called Tyrannis who had taken over their commission, providing updated specifications and continued funding. The modifications he ordered were subtle but devastating. The most significant addition involved behavioral modification chips implanted in every clone's brain. These biochips were represented to the Kaminoans as safeguards against mental instability, insurance that the clones would follow orders without question. In reality, they contained dormant programming for Order 66, the command that would compel the clones to eliminate all Jedi upon activation. The Kaminoans, being amoral scientists interested only in their payment and the perfection of their product, implemented these modifications without question. They took pride in their work, viewing the clone army as their greatest achievement. The fact that they were creating the instrument of the Jedi Order's destruction never occurred to them, nor would they have cared if it had. Tyrannis needed more than just control of the project. He needed the perfect genetic template for the army. His thoughts turned to someone he knew well from the worst day of his Jedi career, Jango Fett, the last survivor of the true Mandalorians from Galidraan. The debt he felt toward the last true Mandalorian, combined with Jango's proven skills as a warrior, made him the perfect choice for their secret project. Before approaching Fett directly, though, Tyrannis had another matter to settle, one that would test his commitment to his new path while providing the opportunity to evaluate the bounty hunter's skills. Darth Sidious had informed him about a dangerous cult called the Bando Gora that was spreading chaos across the Outer Rim, led by someone Tyrannis recognized with shock and sorrow. Kamari Vosa, his former Padawan who had been captured at Galidraan, had not died on her agricultural corps assignment as everyone believed. Instead, she had fallen completely to the dark side and become the leader of this death cult. Sidious wanted both the cult eliminated and a suitable template for the clone army identified, someone capable of killing Jedi if necessary. Tyrannis devised a plan that would accomplish both goals. He placed a massive bounty on Kamari Vosa's head, drawing the galaxy's most dangerous bounty hunters to compete for the prize. In a lawless cantina on one of Bogdan's moons, he watched from the shadows as notorious hunters gathered to accept the challenge. Among them were Jango Fett, scarred and methodical, and his bitter rival Montross, who had betrayed the true Mandalorians years before. Others included killers and mercenaries from across the galaxy, each believing they could claim the bounty that would make them wealthy beyond imagination. The competition proved as brutal as Tyrannis had hoped. The hunters eliminated each other through combat and treachery while pursuing Vosa to her stronghold on the moon Kolma. Throughout the deadly contest, Jango Fett demonstrated the tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency that had made him legendary among his people. When Fett finally tracked Vosa to her lair and defeated her in single combat, Tyrannis emerged from the shadows. Kamari Vosa, driven half-mad by the dark side and years of leading the death cult, recognized her former master even in her deteriorated state. For a moment, their eyes met across the chamber. Tyrannis whispered that he was sorry before using the Force to end her suffering quickly and mercifully. Vosa collapsed, freed at last from the darkness that had consumed her. Jango Fett, shocked by this display of power, demanded his promised payment. Instead, Tyrannis offered him something far more valuable than credits: the role of genetic template for a secret army, along with an unaltered clone he could raise as his son. The bounty hunter, impressed by what he had witnessed and intrigued by the mysterious offer, accepted the proposal that would reshape galactic history. When Tyrannis revealed his connection to Galidraan, telling Jango he had not forgotten their encounter on that frozen battlefield, Fett understood he was being offered both employment and a form of justice for what had been done to his people. With the clone army secured in secret, Tyrannis turned to his public persona's great work, building the Confederacy of Independent Systems. This couldn't happen overnight or through simple recruitment. It required years of patient manipulation, carefully exploiting existing grievances while creating new ones where necessary. The Trade Federation proved the obvious first recruit. Viceroy Newt Gunray still smarted from his defeat at Naboo and the subsequent sanctions that had cost his organization trillions of credits. When Count Dooku approached him publicly through diplomatic channels, presenting himself as a former Jedi Master concerned about Republic overreach, Gunray was initially suspicious. Here was someone who should have been his enemy, speaking about the unfair treatment of his commerce guilds. Dooku's arguments proved persuasive. He pointed out that the Republic taxed the Trade Federation's profits while offering nothing in return. They restricted trade routes, imposed regulations that favored core worlds over the Outer Rim, and used the threat of military force to ensure compliance. Why should the Federation continue serving a government that treated them as enemies rather than partners? In private meetings, Tyrannis revealed more of his intentions without ever mentioning his Sith identity. He promised Gunray that a new government would recognize the Trade Federation's sovereignty, allowing them to operate without interference. More importantly, he guaranteed that Senator Padme Amidala, whom Gunray blamed for his disgrace, would be delivered to him for personal revenge. The Techno Union under Wat Tambor joined next, drawn by promises of unrestricted technology development. The Republic's regulations prevented them from pursuing certain research, particularly in artificial intelligence and weapons technology. Dooku promised them freedom to innovate without ethical constraints, to push the boundaries of science without bureaucratic interference. The Commerce Guild under Shu Mai saw opportunity in chaos. War meant profit for those positioned correctly, and Dooku was offering them the chance to position themselves very well indeed. They would supply both sides initially, then throw their full support behind whichever faction offered them the best terms. It was cynical, amoral, and exactly what Shu Mai's shareholders wanted to hear. The intergalactic banking clan under San Hill proved the most cautious. They had the most to lose from galactic instability, their entire business model depending on reliable currency exchange and debt collection. Dooku convinced them with a simple argument, though. The Republic's debt was unsustainable. Its economy built on borrowed credits it could never repay. Better to control the collapse than be crushed by it. Each recruitment followed a similar pattern. Dooku would identify an organization's grievances, legitimate or manufactured. He would present himself as a reformer seeking peaceful change, someone using his influence to prevent violence rather than cause it. Only after securing their initial cooperation would he gradually reveal the necessity of military action, always framed as defensive preparation against Republic aggression. Dooku's greatest success came from recruiting the Genosians and their leader, Archduke Poggle the Lesser. Genosis became the secret capital of the Separatist movement, its massive droid foundries capable of producing armies in quantities that would overwhelm the Republic's eventual clone forces. The planet's isolation and harsh environment made it perfect for clandestine activities. More significantly, Poggle possessed plans for an ultimate weapon, a battle station capable of destroying entire planets. These early Death Star designs represented power beyond conventional military forces. Dooku carefully secured these plans, understanding their importance to Sidious's long-term vision, even if the technology wouldn't be ready for decades. The public face of the Separatist movement required careful crafting to appear legitimate rather than treasonous. Count Dooku spent years traveling the galaxy, speaking at universities and political assemblies about the Republic's failures. He never called for revolution directly. That would have brought immediate Jedi investigation. Instead, he spoke about reform, about the need for systems to have greater autonomy, and about the dangers of centralized power. The moment that would define the Separatist cause came during Dooku's famous address on Raxus. Standing before a gathering of disaffected senators and corporate leaders, Dooku delivered the speech that would start the fires of rebellion across the galaxy. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with anticipation as representatives from hundreds of worlds waited to hear the former Jedi Master's vision. He spoke of specific grievances that resonated with his audience. The Outer Rim worlds faced taxation without representation, their resources exploited, while their voices went unheard in the Senate. Corporate entities struggled under regulations that favored core world competitors while stifling innovation and growth. Each example he cited struck home with different groups in the audience. Senator Mina Bonteri of Onderon sat in the front row, tears of hope streaming down her face as Dooku articulated everything she had felt but couldn't express. Other delegates nodded vigorously, finally hearing someone speak their frustrations with eloquence and authority. When Dooku finished with a call for peaceful secession and self-determination, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. These beings truly believed they had found their savior, a noble leader who would guide them away from corruption toward justice. None of them suspected they were cheering for the person who would eventually destroy them. His speeches were brilliant examples of manipulation, each word chosen to resonate with specific audiences. On Outer Rim worlds neglected by the Republic, he spoke about abandonment and the right to self-governance. On wealthy trade worlds, he discussed economic freedom and the burden of taxation without representation. On worlds with non-human majorities, he subtly highlighted the Republic's human-centric policies. By 24 BBY, the separatist movement had gained tremendous momentum. Thousands of systems expressed sympathy with Dooku's ideas, even if they weren't ready to formally secede. The Republic Senate grew increasingly concerned, but remained paralyzed by indecision. Some senators wanted to crush the movement with military force. Others sought negotiation, and many simply wanted to ignore it and hope it went away. This paralysis was exactly what Sidious had orchestrated. As Chancellor Palpatine, he publicly called for peace while secretly ensuring that no meaningful reforms would address separatist grievances. He positioned himself as the moderate voice trying to hold the Republic together, earning praise for his diplomatic efforts even as he sabotaged them from within. Behind this noble facade, Dooku built something far darker. Secret facilities across Separatist space developed new weapons and trained special forces. The Separatist military wasn't just battle droids. It included organic commanders who understood tactics, elite units capable of matching clone troopers, and experimental weapons that violated Republic conventions on warfare. During these preparations, Dooku also began recruiting dark acolytes, force-sensitive individuals who could serve as commanders and assassins. The first and most important of these proved to be Asajj Ventress, whom he discovered on Ratatak, where she had become a warlord after the death of her Jedi Master. In the gladiatorial arenas of that war-torn world, Dooku watched Ventress effortlessly defeat multiple opponents with her twin lightsabers. She styled herself a Sith to the cheering crowds, although Dooku recognized her as merely a fallen Jedi whose pain had driven her to darkness. When he descended to the arena floor to test her personally, their brief duel demonstrated her potential while proving her limitations. Rather than killing her after easily disarming her, Dooku offered something she hadn't expected: purpose. He explained that her rage was unfocused, wasted on petty victories, but he could teach her to channel that fury into real power. She would become his assassin, his enforcer, the blade he wielded against those who deserved destruction. Ventress accepted immediately, swearing loyalty to this mysterious figure who promised to make her strong. Another notable recruit was the Kaleesh warrior who would become General Grievous. Legends sources suggest that Dooku and Sidious engineered his shuttle crash on purpose. The Kaleesh had been fighting against their enemies, the Hux, in a war the Republic had ignored until they intervened on behalf of the Hux, condemning the Kaleesh to poverty and servitude. Grievous's body was broken beyond natural healing, but his hatred for the Republic stayed strong. Dooku offered him a choice: die as a forgotten warrior or be reborn as something greater. Using advanced technology, they transformed Grievous into a cyborg specifically designed to kill Jedi. His organic brain housed in a mechanical body that could split his arms into four and wield multiple lightsabers simultaneously. The training of General Grievous became one of Dooku's most significant accomplishments during the early war years. In a private dojo aboard his flagship, dimly lit with a wide circular fighting mat, Dooku personally instructed the cyborg in lightsaber combat. Display cases along the walls would eventually hold lightsabers taken from fallen Jedi, trophies that proved Grievous's deadly effectiveness. During their sparring sessions around 22 BBY, Dooku and Grievous would duel with practiced sabers while the Count refined his creation's technique. Grievous fought with unpredictable sequences using all four mechanical arms in whirling attacks, while Dooku countered with elegant Makashi, demonstrating one-handed parries and precise thrusts that consistently penetrated the cyborg's defenses. As they sparred, Dooku would instruct with icy calm about economy of motion, and the waste of flourish in combat. When Grievous expressed frustration at his inability to use the Force like his teacher, Dooku reminded him that technique and strategy could defeat even a Jedi's Force powers. The cyborg's very existence proved that point, since he had been designed specifically to overcome the advantages that made Jedi seem invincible. Their philosophical exchanges during training revealed the depth of Grievous's transformation. The former Kaleesh warrior sometimes questioned whether slaughtering Jedi made him noble or them simply weak, a cruel irony that pleased Dooku. He explained that the Jedi were constrained by ethics that he and Grievous had discarded, giving them advantages that traditional opponents lacked. When Grievous attacked with renewed ferocity during one session, nearly catching Dooku off guard with an unorthodox maneuver, the Count was forced to use the Force to freeze his student in place. The lesson emphasized that their goal wasn't merely victory, but terror. Every Jedi killed should display their lightsaber openly so others would fear General Grievous's approach. After these training sessions, Dooku would sometimes reflect on his mechanical creation with cold satisfaction. Grievous had become exactly what he intended, a weapon he could direct against the Jedi, learning quickly and becoming perhaps the most dangerous weapon he had ever created. By 22 BBY, the Separatist military machine stood nearly complete. Millions of battle droids waited in hidden factories, while fleets of warships remained in secret shipyards. An entire command structure of generals, admirals, and dark-side adepts prepared for war. All that remained was finding the right trigger to begin the conflict. That trigger would come from an unexpected source: the Jedi themselves. The gathering on Geonosis in 22 BBY served as the final preparation before the Separatist alliance revealed itself publicly. Representatives from hundreds of systems and dozens of major corporations met in person for the first time, signing treaties that would bind them together in Confederation. The ceremony took place in the Geonosian arena, with thousands of battle droids standing at attention as a show of military might. Count Dooku presided over the gathering with aristocratic dignity, presenting the Confederacy as a legitimate government seeking recognition, not a rebellion seeking destruction. He spoke about peaceful secession, about the right of systems to determine their own destinies, and about negotiation rather than warfare. It was all lies, of course. War was always the intended outcome. The performance convinced those who wanted to be convinced, though. Obi-Wan Kenobi's discovery of the meeting changed everything. The Jedi Knight had tracked Jango Fett from Kamino to Geonosis, following a trail of evidence that seemed almost too convenient in retrospect. His capture by Geonosian forces provided exactly the provocation needed for the Jedi to act. His message to the Council, revealing both the Separatist military buildup and the existence of the clone army, set in motion events that had been planned for over a decade. When Kenobi was brought before Dooku in the Geonosian detention facility, it marked their first meeting since Qui-Gon's death. This confrontation revealed more than either participant intended. Dooku genuinely seemed to regret that their paths hadn't crossed sooner, expressing real respect for Kenobi as Qui-Gon's student. More significantly, though, Dooku told Kenobi the truth about Darth Sidious controlling the Senate. He explained that the Republic was already under Sith control, that hundreds of senators were under the influence of a Dark Lord. He even offered Kenobi the chance to join him in destroying the Sith, presenting it as the completion of Qui-Gon's legacy. This moment revealed Dooku's complex psychology. Even after falling to the dark side, part of him sought a worthy partner, someone who could understand his vision. He genuinely believed he could recruit Kenobi, that Qui-Gon's student might see the same truths that had driven Dooku from the Order. When Kenobi refused, dismissing the warnings as lies, Dooku's disappointment was real. Once again, a Jedi chose blindness over difficult truth. The arena execution that followed was pure theater. Padme Amidala, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi faced elaborate deaths designed to satisfy the Geonosian love of spectacle while serving as propaganda for the Separatist cause. The execution of a Republic senator and 2 Jedi would demonstrate that the Confederacy wouldn't be intimidated by the Order's mystique. Mace Windu's strike team of 200 Jedi changed the script, though. Their dramatic entrance into the arena, lightsabers igniting in a circle of light, should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it became a massacre. The Jedi had walked into a trap, surrounded by thousands of battle droids with no escape route. They fought valiantly, but the numbers were overwhelming. Dooku watched from his viewing box with hidden satisfaction. Each dead Jedi represented a victory for the Sith, a reduction in the Order's strength that would make their eventual destruction easier. By the time Yoda arrived with the clone army, barely 30 Jedi remained from the original 200. The Order had suffered its worst single-day loss in 1,000 years, and the war had only just begun. The arrival of the clone army changed the battle's dynamic, but not its purpose. As Dooku retreated to his hangar, he knew the war had begun exactly as planned. The Republic now had its army. The Separatists had revealed their strength, and both sides were committed to a conflict that would consume the galaxy. Everything was proceeding according to Sidious's design. His duels with Kenobi and Skywalker in the hangar proved almost ceremonial, a demonstration of Sith's superiority over the next generation of Jedi. Kenobi fell within seconds, Dooku's superior technique overwhelming the younger man's defenses. Skywalker lasted slightly longer, his raw power and aggressive style forcing Dooku to take him more seriously. The boy's anger made him predictable. When Skywalker charged recklessly, overcome by emotion after seeing Kenobi fall, Dooku simply sidestepped and severed his arm at the elbow with almost casual precision. The young Jedi's scream echoed through the hangar as he collapsed. Dooku could have killed both of them easily. Sidious had plans for Skywalker, and the boy would be allowed to survive and grow stronger. The duel with Yoda proved entirely different. This represented a confrontation between two masters at the height of their powers, former teacher and student meeting as enemies for the first time. When the ancient Jedi Master entered the hangar, his presence in the Force was overwhelming despite his small size. Their exchange of force powers shook the entire hangar before their lightsabers met in a display of swordsmanship that hadn't been seen in centuries. Yoda's ancient technique combined all 7 forms seamlessly, while Dooku's refined Makashi met each strike with perfect precision. For a few moments, Dooku genuinely fought for his life against the master who had trained him. The duel's end had been predetermined. Dooku used the environment to his advantage, toppling a massive power column toward the wounded Kenobi and Skywalker. Yoda, bound by Jedi compassion, abandoned the fight to save them, allowing Dooku to escape to his solar sailor. As his ship lifted off, Dooku allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had just fought his former master, wondering what Yoda thought of seeing his student transformed into a Sith Lord. The questions didn't matter. The path was set, and there was no going back. The meeting with Sidious immediately after confirmed that everything had proceeded according to plan. Standing in that warehouse where they had first discussed their alliance, Sidious congratulated Dooku on his performance. The war had begun perfectly, with both sides now fully committed to a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. Standing there, feeling the echoes of his duel with Yoda, Dooku allowed himself satisfaction. He had successfully orchestrated the beginning of the greatest conflict in galactic history. From the ashes of this war would rise the order he had always envisioned, a galaxy ruled by strength rather than by the weakness of democracy. He stood as Darth Tyranus, architect of war, and his masterpiece had just begun. Master of Deception. For 3 years, Dooku played the galaxy's greatest puppet master while secretly being a puppet himself. The 3 years of the Clone Wars represented the height of Dooku's power and the clearest example of Sith manipulation. During this period, he commanded vast armies across thousands of systems, directed battles that determined the fate of entire sectors, and maintained impossible deception, genuinely leading the Separatist cause while secretly ensuring its eventual defeat. Every victory proved calculated to prolong the conflict, while every loss was deliberate to prevent decisive advantage. All served the grand design that would transform the Republic into the Empire. Dooku had become a master at losing strategically while appearing to fight for victory. The war's early months established patterns that would define the entire conflict. From his command centers, his ancestral palace on Serenno, massive dreadnoughts that served as mobile headquarters, and secret facilities on separatist strongholds, Dooku coordinated a war effort spanning half the galaxy. He maintained the pretense of seeking peaceful resolution whenever it served the greater deception. He had become the galaxy's greatest military commander while secretly working toward its destruction. Inside the strategic command center aboard his flagship, Dooku often stood before holographic displays showing the galaxy-wide conflict while his subordinates awaited orders. General Grievous, towering and mechanical, typically advocated for swift, overwhelming strikes that would crush the Republic quickly. Asajj Ventress, her twin lightsabers hanging at her sides, would suggest targeting specific Jedi for elimination to cripple Republic morale. Dooku, ever composed and calculating, would counter these aggressive proposals with more patient strategies. He might order strikes at key worlds as feints to draw Republic forces into prolonged engagements, inflicting significant casualties while ensuring the enemy achieved minor victories to maintain their hope. A war of attrition served their purposes better than quick conquest, although his subordinates couldn't understand why their leaders seemed to deliberately avoid decisive action. The Battle of Christophsis demonstrated Dooku's strategic approach perfectly. The crystal planet proved valuable for its resources, but more important, as a symbol. By besieging it, Dooku forced the Republic to commit significant forces to its defense, stretching their initially limited clone army thin across multiple fronts. The battle could have been won quickly with overwhelming force. Instead, Dooku ordered his commanders to maintain pressure without achieving breakthrough. During this battle, Dooku deployed Asajj Ventress as his representative, beginning her career as the war's most feared assassin. Her orders proved specific: inflict maximum casualties on the Jedi while avoiding decisive victory. This seemingly contradictory command made perfect sense within the Sith plan. Every dead Jedi weakened the order, yet a quick separatist victory would end the war before it could serve its true purpose. She fought Obi-Wan and Anakin multiple times, always managing to escape at the last moment. Her presence forced the Jedi to divert resources they couldn't spare. Entire task forces were dedicated to tracking her movements. She assassinated key Republic commanders, destroyed critical supply lines, and spread fear wherever she appeared. General Grievous proved another of Dooku's most effective tools during this period. The cyborg's campaigns spread terror throughout the Republic, his reputation growing with each victory. Dooku had personally programmed Grievous's tactical computers with data from thousands of historical battles, making him a strategic genius despite having no formal military training before his transformation. The general's collection of lightsabers taken from dead Jedi became legendary, each trophy representing not just a military victory, but a psychological blow to the Order's morale. The Malevolence campaign showcased Dooku's willingness to use terror as a weapon. This massive warship targeted medical stations and refugee convoys, while the attacks demonstrated that nowhere was safe from separatist reach. When the Jedi eventually destroyed it, Dooku counted this as a victory. The ship had served its purpose in spreading fear. This pattern would repeat throughout the war. Separatist superweapons would appear, cause devastation, then be destroyed in ways that made the Republic feel victorious while actually serving Sith purposes. Beyond simple military strategy, Dooku's management of the war extended to the Separatist Council, Newt Gunray, Wat Tambor, San Hill, and the others, who required constant manipulation. Each believed they would profit from the war, never suspecting they were marked for eventual elimination. His interactions with these leaders revealed his complete transformation into a Sith Lord. Where once he had shown respect for allies and compassion for subordinates, he now ruled through calculated manipulation and the unspoken threat of his power. Whenever council members questioned his strategies, he would respond with harsh logic that allowed no argument. When they showed weakness or disloyalty, they would find their operations mysteriously disrupted until they fell back in line. Throughout the war, Dooku carefully balanced his public persona. In speeches broadcast across separatist space, he presented himself as a reluctant warrior forced to fight for independence. He would appear via hologram at refugee camps, expressing regret for the war's casualties while blaming Republic aggression. He attended state funerals for fallen separatist heroes, delivering eulogies that moved audiences to tears. The actual conduct of the war grew increasingly brutal. The deployment of weapons like the Blue Shadow virus, which could have depopulated entire worlds if released, showed Dooku's willingness to threaten genocide. The use of advanced control techniques to turn peaceful citizens into unwilling soldiers violated every convention of civilized warfare. Each escalation proved calculated to force the Republic to respond with equal brutality, eroding the moral distinctions between the two sides. The relationship between Dooku and Ventress evolved significantly as the war progressed. She had grown increasingly powerful under his tutelage, mastering dark side techniques that made her a match for most Jedi Knights. Her success rate on missions approached perfection, and her loyalty seemed absolute. She addressed him as master, followed his orders without question, and showed no ambition beyond serving his will. This very success became her downfall. Sidious began to see her as a threat to the rule of two. She had grown too powerful, too capable. If she and Dooku ever united against him, they might actually succeed in overthrowing him. The rule of two demanded only two Sith, a master and an apprentice. Ventress represented a third, an anomaly that couldn't be tolerated. When Sidious ordered Dooku to eliminate her as a test of loyalty, Dooku complied without hesitation. During a space battle over Sullust, he commanded his forces to abandon Ventress when Republic reinforcements arrived. When she desperately called for reinforcements during the battle, Dooku coldly cut off her communication and ordered his own ships to target her fighter. The betrayal was complete and merciless. Ventress had served him faithfully for years, killed numerous Jedi at his command, and been his most effective weapon. When Sidious demanded her death, Dooku threw her away like a useless tool. This revealed how completely the dark side had corrupted him. The man who had once agonized over difficult decisions now betrayed his most loyal servant without hesitation. Ventress's survival and quest for revenge created unexpected complications. Her alliance with the Night Sisters of Dathomir and their attempt to assassinate Dooku using savage opress as a weapon forced him to demonstrate his full power. The assault on his palace on Serenno, where he fought Ventress and two Night Sister assassins while blinded by poison, proved that even at over 80 years old, Dooku remained one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. The battle was fierce and desperate. The Night Sisters used ancient magics that Dooku had never encountered, becoming invisible to both sight and Force senses. Poison darts had temporarily blinded him, leaving him to fight by instinct alone. He survived through sheer mastery of the Force, sensing his opponent's movements through subtle changes in air pressure and temperature. When he finally drove them off with a massive Force lightning storm that filled his entire chamber, he had sustained several wounds but emerged victorious. The aftermath of this assassination attempt proved typically brutal. Dooku ordered Grievous to massacre the Night Sisters, eliminating an entire culture to remove a threat to his power. The assault on Dathomir demonstrated the fate of those who challenged Dooku: complete annihilation. Mother Talzin, the Night Sister leader and one of the few beings who could match Sidious in darkside power, was forced to flee into the spirit realm. The introduction of Savage Opress as a potential new apprentice showed Dooku's continued attempts to circumvent the rule of two. Despite his betrayal of Ventress at Sidious's command, Dooku sought his own apprentice, who might help him eventually overthrow his master. He trained Savage briefly, teaching him basic lightsaber techniques and darkside powers. The boy proved too uncontrollable. His loyalty divided between Ventress, who had created him, and Dooku, who sought to use him. When the truth was revealed and all three fought in Dooku's palace, the battle demonstrated the chaos that resulted from violating Sith traditions. Savage, overwhelmed by conflicting commands, turned on both his would-be masters and escaped to eventually find his brother, Darth Maul. One of the most insidious aspects of Dooku's war management involved his manipulation of both sides' intelligence networks. As clues about the clone army's true origins began to surface, Dooku personally intervened to protect the secret. The Jedi had discovered that Sifo Dyas had ordered the army, yet they didn't know about Dooku's involvement or the inhibitor chips that would trigger Order 66. When Jedi investigators got too close to the truth, Dooku eliminated witnesses personally. He murdered Silman, the aide to Sifo Dyas who knew too much, and fought Anakin and Obi-Wan on Obadiah to prevent them from uncovering the full conspiracy. During this confrontation, the Jedi finally confirmed that Tyrannis and Dooku were the same person, a revelation that came far too late to prevent the trap closing around them. The war also saw Dooku's attempt to corrupt Jedi directly. The case of Quinlan Vos represented his most successful conversion of a Jedi since his own fall. When the Jedi Council made the unprecedented decision to assassinate him, a violation of their own principles that showed how desperate they had become, it played perfectly into his hands. When Dooku captured Vos on Raxus, the torture and dark-side training he provided created a genuine, if temporary, Sith convert. Dooku found himself genuinely impressed by Vos's potential, seeing in him a younger version of himself, a Jedi disillusioned by the Order's hypocrisy and willing to embrace harder truths. During their training sessions, he taught Vos advanced techniques, sharing knowledge he had given to no other student since Qui-Gon. The relationship between Dooku and Vos during this period represented perhaps the closest thing to genuine mentorship Dooku had experienced in decades. He saw potential for a true successor, someone who understood both the light and dark sides of the Force, even if this relationship ultimately served the greater deception. When Ventress sacrificed herself to save Vos and return him to the light, Dooku's reaction proved telling. Disappointment, but not surprise. He had expected betrayal, because that was the nature of relationships touched by the dark side. When intelligence reports later confirmed that Ventress had died on Christophsis saving Quinlan Vos, Dooku received the news alone in his private study. For a moment, his Sith Lord disguise fell away, revealing something almost human beneath. He spoke quietly to the empty room, acknowledging his former student as traitor, assassin, and pupil who might find in death the peace that had eluded her in life. This brief epitaph, spoken with what might have been genuine regret, revealed the personal cost of his choices. He had betrayed his most loyal servant to serve Sidious, and now even that betrayal had come to nothing. His isolation deepened as he realized that trust and loyalty were luxuries the dark side would never permit him. With Ventress gone, Dooku's attention turned fully back to the war's endgame. Throughout the war's third year, Dooku and Sidious began positioning pieces for the conflict's end. The Outer Rim sieges drew Jedi generals away from Coruscant to distant battlefields. Major entanglements at worlds like Felucia, Megiddo, and Cato Nemoidia tied down the Order's best warriors in campaigns designed to keep them occupied when Order 66 was executed. In late 20 BBY, the war had achieved most of its intended purposes. The Jedi stood scattered and exhausted, with many of their best killed in battle. The Republic had accepted increasingly authoritarian measures, with Chancellor Palpatine accumulating emergency powers that effectively made him a dictator. The clone army, with its hidden Order 66 programming, had fully integrated into Republic military structure, with Jedi commanders trusting them completely. Dooku's usefulness to Sidious neared its end. The signs proved subtle, but present for those who could read them. Sidious began bypassing Dooku for certain operations, dealing directly with Grievous or other commanders. The quality of resources provided to Separatist forces decreased, as if Sidious already prepared for their defeat. During their communications, Sidious's tone had changed from collaborative to commanding, treating Dooku less as an apprentice and more as a servant. Dooku certainly sensed this change. His actions in the war's final months suggested someone preparing for betrayal. He began consolidating personal resources on Serenno, hiding wealth and weapons that weren't part of official Separatist supplies. His speeches became more desperate, warning of dark forces manipulating both sides of the war, truths that sounded like paranoid rambling to most listeners, but were actually accurate descriptions of reality. He also began documenting his knowledge, creating holocrons and data archives that contained everything he had learned about the Force, lightsaber combat, and galactic history. These weren't meant for Sidious or the Separatists, but for future generations who might need this knowledge. Even as he served the dark side, part of him sought to preserve something of value from his life's work. The mission to kidnap Chancellor Palpatine in 19 BBY came presented to Dooku as another orchestrated event. General Grievous would capture Palpatine during a bold assault on Coruscant, providing justification for new emergency powers and possibly the elimination of prominent Jedi who would attempt rescue. Dooku's role involved engaging the rescuers in combat with specific instructions about how the confrontation should unfold. Dooku believed the plan involved him defeating or capturing the Jedi rescuers, followed by a staged escape that would position him for the war's final phase. He had received assurances from Sidious that this confrontation would eliminate key Jedi while maintaining their covers. Perhaps afterward, with the Jedi further weakened and the Republic fully militarized, they could reveal themselves and claim direct control. What Dooku didn't know was that Sidious had spent 3 years preparing Anakin Skywalker specifically for this moment. Every battle they had fought, every loss Anakin had suffered, and every attachment he had formed, all of it designed to bring him to this point, primed for conversion to the dark side. Dooku served not as the director of this play, but merely another actor whose final scene was about to begin. Final Betrayal. Dooku walked into that throne room believing he was irreplaceable. He was dead wrong. The Battle of Coruscant represented the largest military engagement in the core world since the formation of the Republic. Thousands of warships filled the skies above the capital, creating an artificial dawn visible from the planet's surface. Citizens who had felt safe in the Republic's heart now witnessed war's reality as debris rained down on their towers and stray turbo-laser blasts shattered windows in buildings that had stood for millennia. Dooku observed this orchestrated chaos from the observation deck of the Invisible Hand, General Grievous's flagship. The massive Providence-class dreadnought served as the Separatist command center for the assault, its hull scarred from 3 years of warfare, but still formidable. Through the viewports, Dooku watched Republic and Separatist forces tear each other apart in a battle that would determine the war's outcome. Or so both sides believed. In truth, every aspect of this engagement had been planned months in advance. The bold strike at Coruscant, seemingly a desperate gamble by the Separatists, actually served multiple purposes in Sidious's design. It would justify final emergency powers for the Chancellor, eliminate key political opponents who died in the attack, and most importantly, provide the stage for Anakin Skywalker's final test. Dooku had received specific instructions from Sidious about the coming confrontation. Skywalker would come with Kenobi to rescue the Chancellor. Then, they would duel in the observation tower, where Palpatine was being held. Based on what Dooku understood of the plan, he would defeat them both, eliminating Kenobi to push Skywalker toward the dark side through grief and rage, then allowing himself to be captured after demonstrating Sith superiority. In Dooku's mind, this capture would prove temporary. After interrogation that would reveal strategic but ultimately useless intelligence, he would be imprisoned, awaiting trial. During that trial, he could expose Republic corruption, justify the Separatist cause, and position himself as a political prisoner rather than a war criminal. Eventually, after a staged execution or prisoner exchange, he would take a new identity as one of the Empire's shadow rulers, working alongside Sidious to govern from behind the throne. This fantasy reveals the depth of Sidious's manipulation over his apprentice. Dooku, despite his intelligence and experience, couldn't conceive that he had become entirely expendable. His aristocratic upbringing, his decades as one of the galaxy's most powerful beings, and his genuine contributions to the Sith cause, all of it had convinced him he stood irreplaceable. He saw himself as Sidious's partner, not merely his tool. Dooku's arrogance would prove his undoing. He could never imagine that someone might manipulate him so completely. The approach of the Jedi through the ship proved almost leisurely. Dooku could sense them cutting through battle droids with mechanical efficiency, making their way steadily toward his position. Anakin's presence in the Force had grown significantly since their last encounter. The young man blazed with barely controlled power. His emotions created ripples in the Force that Dooku could feel from hundreds of meters away. Kenobi, by contrast, remained a steady flame, reliable, predictable, limited by his orthodox training. When they finally entered the observation tower, Dooku stood on the elevated platform where Palpatine sat bound to a chair. The theatricality of the scene proved perfect, the captured Chancellor looking appropriately distressed, the evil Separatist leader standing ready for confrontation, and the heroic Jedi arriving for rescue. Every element appeared exactly as scripted, a performance where everyone knew their roles, except for the true nature of the production. The conversation that preceded the duel carried loaded double meanings that only Dooku and Sidious understood. Palpatine's encouragement to the Jedi contained subtle Force suggestions, pushing them toward aggression. His apparent fear masked careful observation, evaluating Anakin's readiness for conversion. Dooku descended from the platform with casual grace, his red lightsaber igniting with the distinctive snap hiss that had preceded so many deaths. He taunted them about their previous encounters, reminding Anakin of his lost hand and mocking Kenobi's inferior skills. The words were calculated to provoke, designed to push them toward the emotional responses that would make them easier to defeat. This psychological warfare had worked before. Anakin was no longer the same impulsive boy. When Anakin responded that his powers had doubled since their last meeting, Dooku delivered his final taunt about pride preceding a fall. As their blades met, Dooku immediately realized this wasn't the same impulsive boy from Geonosis. The strength behind Anakin's strikes was shocking. Each parry sent vibrations through Dooku's arms that he hadn't experienced in decades. Something fundamental had changed in the young Jedi. War had forged him into something far more dangerous. The duel began with careful precision on Dooku's part. His Makashi form, refined over 8 decades, initially allowed him to control the engagement. He maneuvered the two Jedi against each other, forcing them to adjust their teamwork constantly. Their coordination had improved since Geonosis. They moved as a unit, covering each other's weaknesses. Dooku's experience gave him the advantage. For now, even that advantage was slipping away faster than he expected. He identified Kenobi as the weak link, just as planned. The Jedi Master was skilled but conventional, his Soresu defensive form predictable in its patterns. Dooku began targeting him specifically, forcing him to give ground while preventing Anakin from effectively assisting. Each exchange pushed Kenobi further off balance, setting up the moment where he could be eliminated from the fight. The moment came suddenly. Dooku had maneuvered Kenobi into a vulnerable position, his defense compromised by the need to avoid Anakin's blade. With a combination of precise strikes and force manipulation, Dooku created an opening. His boot connected with Kenobi's midsection, sending him flying across the room. Before the Jedi Master could recover, Dooku used the Force to lift him and hurl him into a railing with bone-crushing force. Everything was proceeding according to the plan Sidious had outlined, or so Dooku believed. Kenobi hit the metal barrier and collapsed, unconscious or nearly so. Following what he believed represented Sidious's script, Dooku used the Force to drop a section of the elevated platform onto Kenobi's unconscious form, immobilizing without killing him, per the plan. This moment should have changed everything within Dooku's understanding. With Kenobi apparently defeated, possibly dying, Skywalker would succumb to rage and grief. He would tap into the dark side to defeat Dooku, taking his first real step toward becoming Sidious's new apprentice. Dooku would then allow himself to suffer defeat, playing his part in the larger drama. Something went wrong immediately. Skywalker's response wasn't the unfocused rage Dooku expected. Instead, cold fury emerged, controlled and directed. The young man's eyes showed anger, yes, but also calculation. When their blades met again, the difference was immediately apparent. This wasn't a Padawan overcome by emotion. This was a warrior who had learned to channel his feelings into strength. Each strike from Skywalker carried more power than the last. His Form 5 Gem So style, aggressive and strength-based, began overwhelming Dooku's precise Makashi. Where Dooku relied on efficiency and technique, Anakin brought raw power that turned those advantages into liabilities. The elegant footwork of Form 2 became retreat, while precise blade control became desperate defense. Dooku's growing realization that he had miscalculated catastrophically became clear. This wasn't the same impulsive boy from Geonosis. 3 years of war had transformed Anakin into something far more dangerous, a warrior who could channel his emotions without being consumed by them. The Chosen One was finally manifesting his true potential, and that potential was terrifying. Dooku attempted to regain control through taunting, trying to provoke the unfocused rage that would make Anakin vulnerable. He spoke about fear, about anger, and about the dark side's power. Skywalker didn't respond with words, though, only with increasingly powerful strikes that drove Dooku back toward the viewport. The transparent steel behind him showed the battle still raging, explosions creating a backdrop to his defeat. The end came with shocking suddenness. In the span of perhaps 3 seconds, Skywalker executed a combination that completely destroyed Dooku's defense. A powerful overhead strike forced Dooku's blade down. Before he could recover, Anakin's blade swept in a circular motion that Dooku couldn't follow quickly enough. The young man's lightsaber caught both of Dooku's wrists, a move practically impossible against a Makashi master. The Count's hands, still gripping its lightsaber, fell to the floor with a soft thud. The pain proved secondary to the shock. Dooku dropped to his knees, staring at the cauterized stumps where his hands had been. The smell of burned flesh filled his nostrils. This wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to suffer defeat, not maiming. The severed hands that had wielded a lightsaber for 8 decades lay on the floor like discarded props, still clutching the weapon that had defined him. Looking up at Skywalker, who now held both lightsabers crossed at his throat, Dooku waited for the next part of the script, his capture. Surely now Sidious would intervene, would ensure his survival for the next phase of the plan. He had served faithfully for 13 years, had orchestrated the entire war, and had played his role perfectly. His reward was coming. Then, Palpatine spoke, and with 4 words, Dooku's entire understanding of reality collapsed. Palpatine ordered Anakin to execute him. The command emerged simple and direct, delivered with a slight smile that only Dooku could see from his position. The mask of the frightened Chancellor slipped for just a moment, revealing the Sith Lord beneath. This wasn't part of the plan. This had never been part of the plan. In that instant of terrible clarity, Dooku understood everything. He had never been Sidious's partner or successor. He had functioned as a tool, nothing more. Every moment from his recruitment to his final betrayal had been orchestrated. The war, the deaths, his own fall to the dark side, all of it had been designed to bring about this exact moment where he would die to complete Anakin Skywalker's conversion. Dooku's eyes widened in shock and betrayal as he looked at Palpatine. He tried to speak, to reveal the truth, to warn the Jedi about the trap they had walked into. His mouth opened, forming the beginning of Palpatine's name. Shock paralyzed his throat, though. The most eloquent speaker in the galaxy, the man whose words had swayed entire systems, found himself mute at the moment when speech might have saved him and the entire Republic. All he could do was stare at his master, at Darth Sidious hidden behind Palpatine's mask, with the slow understanding of how thoroughly he had been used. 13 years of service, of absolute loyalty, of believing he was special, irreplaceable, and essential to the grand design. It had all been a lie. He was as disposable as Maul had been, as Ventress had been, as every tool the Sith had ever used and discarded. In his final moments, Dooku finally understood the true nature of the dark side. It consumed everything. even its most faithful servants. Skywalker hesitated, the Jedi in him resisting the execution of an unarmed prisoner. His face showed conflict, the desire for revenge warring with his training. He spoke the words his teachers had drilled into him, saying he shouldn't kill a defenseless opponent, that it wasn't the Jedi way. Palpatine pressed, his voice carrying subtle Force suggestions that Dooku could sense even in his final moments. The Chancellor spoke of justice, of ending the war, and of how Dooku was too dangerous to be kept alive. Each word carried dark power, pushing against Anakin's weakening resistance. When Palpatine delivered his final command with absolute authority, Dooku saw the moment Skywalker made his decision. The blue lightsabers moved in a scissoring motion, and Count Dooku, Darth Tyranus, one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history, died before his body hit the floor. 8 decades of life, 6 decades of Force mastery, and 13 years of Sith apprenticeship all ended in a single moment of betrayal. The immediate aftermath sent shockwaves through both sides of the war. General Grievous assumed command of Separatist forces, but lacked Dooku's political skills. The Separatist Council began fracturing without their charismatic leader. What the galaxy didn't know was that Dooku's death had been precisely timed. Order 66 waited only weeks away, and his removal eliminated the only being besides Palpatine who knew about the clone programming. With Dooku dead, no one remained who could warn the Jedi about the trap closing around them. The Separatist leaders, soon to be herded to Mustafar ostensibly for their protection, had no idea they faced gathering for execution. Dooku had served as their shield against Sidious's direct manipulation. Without him, they became helpless pawns awaiting disposal. When Vader arrived to kill them all, they died believing Sidious would save them, just as Dooku had died believing he would survive. Historical analysis of Dooku's life reveals a figure of profound tragedy. He possessed brilliance, power, and genuine commitment to his vision of galactic order. His criticisms of the Republic and Jedi Order often proved valid. Corruption had infected the Senate. The Jedi had grown complacent, and radical change was necessary. These observations showed remarkable insight and courage to voice. This same intelligence and conviction made him the perfect tool for Sith manipulation, though. Every strength became a weakness in Sidious's hands. His pride prevented him from seeing his expendability. His cynicism about the Jedi blinded him to Sith betrayal. His belief in his own superiority made him unable to conceive that someone could manipulate him so completely. The comparison between Dooku and Anakin Skywalker proves particularly instructive. Both stood as exceptional Force users who fell to the dark side. Both suffered manipulation by Palpatine into becoming weapons against the Jedi, and both believed they brought order to chaos through their actions. The crucial difference emerged in that Anakin eventually found redemption through love for his son, while Dooku died alone, betrayed by the master he had served faithfully. In many ways, Dooku represented the opposite example of what the Jedi could become. He maintained their discipline, their martial prowess, and their conviction, but divorced from compassion and humility. He showed what happened when Jedi training combined with Sith philosophy, a being of tremendous capability devoted to fundamentally flawed principles. The ultimate tragedy of Count Dooku emerged in that he was right about so many things, but wrong about the most important one. The Republic was corrupt. The Jedi had grown complacent, and radical change proved necessary. His solution, embracing the dark side and orchestrating war, only accelerated the very problems he sought to solve. In trying to save civilization through tyranny, he helped create a tyranny far worse than anything he had opposed. His death marked not just the end of a life, but the completion of a manipulation that had begun decades earlier. From the moment young Dooku had questioned the Jedi Code as a child, through his disillusionment on Galidraan, to his final moments aboard the Invisible Hand, every step had been anticipated and guided by the Dark Lord of the Sith. Count Dooku's story doesn't end with the hero's last battle, or a wise man's peaceful death. Instead, it ends with the cruel truth of Sith tradition. The apprentice must die so a new darkness can take his place. Dooku's death allowed Palpatine to become Emperor and pushed Anakin toward the dark side. He helped create the very empire he thought he would help rule. His fall became the perfect example of how the dark side corrupts even the best intentions. In his final moment, as the lightsabers crossed at his throat, perhaps Dooku finally understood what he had avoided his whole life. Power without wisdom doesn't create order. It creates chaos. Strength without compassion doesn't bring justice. It brings tyranny. The dark side's promises are always lies. Its gifts are always poison. And its embrace is always, in the end, deadly. And yet, in that final moment aboard the Invisible Hand, as Anakin's lightsabers crossed at his throat, something was quietly wrong about the whole picture. Every Sith who had come before him bore the mark of their corruption in their eyes, that unmistakable yellow that told the galaxy exactly what they were. But Dooku, a man who had killed Jedi, started a galactic war and betrayed his closest friend. His eyes never changed, not once. For someone that deep in the dark side, that shouldn't have been possible. Count Dooku was a Sith Lord who served Darth Sidious, commanded armies, defeated Jedi, and carried a red lightsaber with the title Darth Tyranus. However, his eyes never turned yellow even when Anakin ended his life. This matters because Sith eyes are a signature mark that appeared on Darth Maul, Anakin, and Sidious. The rule seemed clear: use the dark side, get the eyes. But with Dooku, the rule stopped working. The answer lies in 5 separate reasons, each one revealing something important about how the dark side operates and what the Sith eyes truly represent. This explanation draws from both canon sources like Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones, Star Wars Episode III Revenge of the Sith, and Star Wars The Clone Wars, and Legends materials such as the novel Darth Plagueis by James Luceno, the Dark Side Sourcebook, and Book of Sith, Secrets from the Dark Side. The first reason is that Sith eyes are not automatic. The Dark Side Sourcebook explains that they do not appear the moment a person turns to the dark side, which challenges the common assumption about how dark side corruption works. The eyes appear when a person completely drowns in the dark side, going beyond simply using it to become fully sunk in it. The dark side must fill every part of them until nothing else remains pulling them back. Many dark side users never develop Sith eyes at all, proving this point clearly. In the Clone Wars, Asajj Ventress used the dark side constantly and was trained by Dooku himself, yet her eyes remained normal throughout her entire service as a dark side assassin. Savage Opress was turned into a dark side weapon by the Night Sisters, but his eyes stayed normal as well, despite the heavy corruption he endured. Even Kylo Ren never developed them, despite his deep commitment to the dark side and his years of service to the First Order. In Legends, the Book of Sith explains that Sith eyes appear when a person stops fighting the dark side and allows it to take over completely without any mental or emotional barriers. The measure is not how much a person uses the Force, but how much they let it change them from within, altering their very nature. Most observers miss the fact that timing matters more than power when it comes to transformation. Revenge of the Sith shows Anakin developing yellow eyes within hours of his turn, though he was experiencing a complete mental and emotional breakdown at that moment. He turned against the younglings, confronted Padme, fought Obi-Wan, and lost most of his body in a single day of terrible events. His change was immediate because his emotional collapse was total and uncontrolled. Most Sith slide slowly into corruption, and that delay matters a lot because it allows for the possibility of maintaining control. Some reach that breaking point in weeks, while others take years, and some never reach it at all during their entire time as darkside users. The second reason is that Dooku never surrendered emotionally, setting him apart from typical Sith behavior. This traces back to his extensive training as a Jedi Master, where discipline was built into who he was. He remained calm and controlled even after turning to the dark side, never allowing fury or dark emotion to define his approach. His lightsaber style, Makashi, focuses on control and efficiency rather than wild aggression or emotional outbursts. Dooku treated the dark side as a tool to master, not a force to surrender to or be consumed by. Most Sith Lords operate completely differently from this controlled approach. As explained in the Dark Side sourcebook, they are powered by fury and dark emotion that burns through their control until nothing remains except raw anger driving every action. Throughout the Clone Wars, Dooku proved this emotional distance again and again. While other Force users lost themselves to anger, Dooku stayed calm and calculating. This mattered because emotional surrender speeds up corruption, letting the dark side flow through without any resistance. The difference between Dooku and Maul shows how rare this approach was among dark side followers. Maul was pure fury from the beginning, with nothing else defining his existence. His eyes were yellow because there was nothing else left of who he might have been before his transformation. In contrast, Dooku was calm and thoughtful, able to discuss politics and negotiate with senators as if he were still a respected leader. The third reason is that control alone was not the whole answer, despite how effective it seemed for Dooku. The Book of Sith makes clear that self-control is not a permanent shield against dark side corruption, no matter how strong someone's willpower might be. Many Sith Lords began as disciplined individuals with complete control over their emotions, only to fall apart later as the dark side slowly eroded their defenses. The dark side waits quietly, working its way in slowly like water finding cracks in stone. Eventually, everyone breaks unless something else protects them from being corrupted. History proves that discipline alone fails eventually for every dark side user. Darth Revan, documented in Legends materials, was a brilliant strategist who turned to the dark side on purpose, fully aware of the risks he was taking. He believed he could use it without being corrupted, maintaining his goals and identity throughout. That belief turned out to be totally wrong, as the longer he used the dark side, the more it changed him from within until his original self was lost. The ancient Sith Empire had entire schools and academies teaching discipline and strategy as a way to control dark side corruption. Yet every single one of their followers ended up corrupted anyway, proving that even planned methods ultimately fail. So how did Dooku avoid this fate when so many others failed? The answer lies in the fourth reason, which is that Sidious needed Dooku unchanged for his grand plan to succeed. In Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars, Dooku was the public face of the Separatist movement, serving as its official political leader rather than a hidden Sith agent. He was a respected former Jedi Master who could convince entire star systems to join his cause against what he presented as Republic corruption. He needed to appear as fighting for justice and reform, not someone consumed by dark side corruption or driven by evil intentions. Yellow eyes would have ruined everything instantly and exposed the entire trick. Dooku's arguments only worked because he didn't look like a Sith. If he had openly displayed that corruption while attacking the Republic, his believability would have collapsed before anyone ever listened to what he had to say. The entire political plan would collapse in that moment, revealing the Sith trick before the Clone Wars could even begin serving their true purpose. Moving on, Sith Lords shape their apprentices for specific purposes according to their overall strategy. Darth Maul was designed as a weapon for elimination and scaring enemies, so his appearance and obvious corruption didn't matter to his effectiveness. Darth Vader was crafted as a symbol of power meant to control the galaxy through fear, so his visible corruption and mechanical body actually made him more effective at his assigned role. Dooku, however, was entirely different as a politician and general who required public support and trust to function effectively. His appearance had to match his mission perfectly, without any hint of Sith corruption showing through. According to Darth Plagueis, Sidious possessed the knowledge and power to control Dooku's corruption process. Sidious was the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years, understanding dark side mechanics better than anyone alive during that era. Whether through Sith techniques passed down through ancient texts, direct force manipulation, or simply limiting how deeply Dooku could sink into the dark side, Sidious carefully managed the corruption process throughout their time together. In Revenge of the Sith, the moment that purpose ended and Anakin became available as a more suitable replacement, Dooku became easy to replace in Sidious's calculation. Sidious discarded him without any hesitation or regret once his usefulness expired. The fifth and final reason is that Dooku never crossed the point of no return that transforms a dark side user completely. According to the Book of Sith, when eyes turn yellow, it means a person has crossed a line they can never return from. The person they were before is gone forever, replaced by something totally different. Throughout the Clone Wars and Attack of the Clones, he committed terrible acts without hesitation. Still, somewhere in his mind, he never fully let go of who he had been before. He remained committed mentally to the Sith plan, but not absorbed emotionally by the dark side itself. This made him perfect for Sidious's temporary needs, but also replaceable. Sidious needed a stand-in who could serve a specific purpose and then be removed. Dooku filled that role, yet it guaranteed his eventual disposal. All 5 reasons connect to explain Dooku's unchanged eyes. Sith eyes require fully giving in. Dooku's discipline delayed that. Self-control alone does not explain everything, as others with similar discipline still fall. Sidious needed Dooku unchanged for political reasons, so he kept him that way. And Dooku himself never fully surrendered in the way that triggers the transformation. Based on the sources, Sith eyes are proof that the person being observed is gone forever. Dooku avoided that fate because he was useful, unchanged. His eyes remained blue because his corruption stayed incomplete, managed by Sidious and maintained by Dooku's self-control. Ultimately, Dooku's lack of Sith eyes showed exactly what he was, a controlled tool in Sidious's plan rather than a true transformed Sith Lord. He believed he was shaping the galaxy. In reality, Sidious was shaping him. When his usefulness ended, he was discarded like every other person who believed discipline meant survival. That discipline, the very thing that kept his eyes clear and his cover intact, also left a crack in his thinking that never fully closed. Because a man who spent decades convincing himself he was in control of the dark side had to find a reason why that was acceptable. And somewhere along the way, he found one, in a conversation with his own master, in a garden, 60 years before the Clone Wars. The question of whether Yoda studied the dark side has a definitive answer rooted in how fallen Jedi reinterpret their past. The evidence spans both legends and canon sources across 63 years, revealing how memory becomes distorted when an individual's entire worldview collapses. Count Dooku's private speculation reveals a belief based on a misunderstanding. The Legends novel Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno documents the Sith Lord's thoughts during the Clone Wars. The passage describes his surprise at Geonosis, where Yoda's easy handling of Sith lightning caught him off guard. This surprise made Dooku wonder whether his former master had delved into the dark arts across 800 years, if only to familiarize himself with his perceived enemy. The specific phrasing matters considerably. Dooku frames this as wondering, not knowing, showing speculation rather than certainty. He imagines Yoda studying darkness to understand enemies, not embracing it for power. But something planted this dangerous idea in Dooku's mind decades earlier. A single conversation 63 years before the Clone Wars provided the foundation for this misinterpretation. The Legends novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart reveals the crucial moment through flashback. Young Dooku sat with Yoda beside the ornamental pond in the Jedi Temple Gardens one evening, contemplating his upcoming departure for his first solo mission. He felt unusually heavy that night, as if realizing for the first time how easy it would be to sink into the Force's dark depths. Their philosophical discussion turned to the nature of the Force itself. Dooku spoke about how the Force runs through all life, high and low, great and small, light and dark. He stopped awkwardly after mentioning light, but Yoda finished the thought for him. The ancient master acknowledged that he had felt the touch of the dark across his long life, asking what mistakes a soul as great as his could make in 800 years. When the shocked apprentice could only stare, Yoda revealed his answer through laughter and a poke of his cane. Many mistakes, he explained, before growing serious with a warning that the dark side is mightiest in the mighty. This admission greatly altered everything the young Jedi understood about his master. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order had just acknowledged feeling the touch of darkness directly, not merely resisting temptation from a distance. Yoda explained that the Force includes darkness as part of existence, but added the crucial warning that his apprentice should not study it too closely, though Jedi must know it exists. That final phrase about necessary knowledge versus dangerous obsession contained the seed of everything that would follow. However, young Dooku's earlier training had already made him vulnerable to misunderstanding these words. The canon audio drama, Dooku, Jedi Lost, by Cavan Scott, reveals critical context about influences on the young initiate. During his training, Dooku encountered Jedi Master Lenne Kostana, who believed the Order must actively prepare for potential Sith threats. Kostana searched for Sith relics scattered across the galaxy and studied forbidden materials like the bestiary of Darth Kaldoth, despite the Council's disapproval. Though she would later choose Dooku's friend Sifo Dyas as her Padawan while Yoda selected Dooku, her unusual approach left a lasting impression. She argued that younglings should be trained to identify and combat darkside artifacts, believing the Jedi were dangerously unprepared. Though the Council dismissed these concerns as unnecessary, considering her methods too close to dangerous territory, this exposure established a dangerous belief in Dooku's mind. Dedicated Jedi could apparently study darkness if it served a greater purpose. He watched Kostana break Council rules to research the enemy, learning that defeating evil sometimes required understanding it deeply. Years later, when Yoda acknowledged feeling darkness across 8 centuries and stated that Jedi must know it, the combination created a pattern. Perhaps exceptional individuals could walk closer to darkness than others without falling. Written evidence from Dooku's youth reveals this pattern developing over time. The in-universe training manual, The Jedi Path, contains handwritten annotations from both Yoda and young Dooku that document this dangerous progression. Yoda reviewed the book around 115 BBY, and Dooku received it from his master, Thame Cerulean, owning it from approximately 89 to 82 BBY. The young Padawan read Yoda's notes throughout his training, absorbing every word. On a page discussing the Sith's supposed defeat after the Battle of Ruusan, Yoda had written a marginal note acknowledging that he sometimes sensed darkness and that Jedi must remain vigilant. Directly below this, young Dooku added his own observation about idle rumors suggesting the Sith survived under the rule of 2, one master and one apprentice. Another page discussed holocrons in the Jedi archives, and Dooku noted that his classmate had stolen a Sith holocron temporarily, observing that Jedi information resources were not as secure as the Council believed. He added another note questioning whether Sith holocrons revealed their secrets to just anyone, implying that certain individuals could access them. These annotations reveal a young Padawan tracking patterns of those who engaged with darkside materials. To someone already fascinated by forbidden knowledge, these pieces suggested that exceptional Jedi could engage with darkness more directly than others. Years of growing doubt would twist these memories into permission to abandon everything the Jedi stood for. Dooku grew increasingly troubled by what he perceived as corruption throughout the Jedi Order and the Republic it served. He believed the Jedi had become tools of a broken government, enforcing laws that perpetuated injustice rather than preventing it. Eventually, he left the Order entirely, returning to his homeworld Serenno to claim his family title as Count. From there, he fell to the dark side, becoming Darth Tyranus, apprentice to Darth Sidious. From this new position as a Sith Lord, having crossed every line Yoda warned about, the fallen Jedi reconsidered those old conversations. The memory of Yoda acknowledging darkness transformed in his mind. Perhaps Yoda had done more than simply feel the dark side across 8 centuries. Perhaps he had studied it deliberately, like Kostana studied artifacts, and that hidden research explained his extraordinary wisdom. This reinterpretation shows how perspective alters memory. What Yoda actually taught was vigilance and honest self-awareness. What Dooku now remembered was permission and precedent. The speculation crystallized during the Clone Wars after a specific encounter triggered the memory. Labyrinth of Evil documents Dooku's thoughts, forming years after his fall. During the battle on Geonosis, Dooku fought his former master directly, hurling Sith lightning at the ancient Jedi. Yoda deflected the attack with surprising ease, parrying the dark side technique as if he had trained specifically to counter it. This unexpected skill planted a question in Dooku's mind. The text states that Yoda's easy handling of Sith lightning made Dooku wonder whether the Jedi Master had delved into the dark arts across his 800 years, if only as a means of familiarizing himself with his perceived enemy. The passage then connects this speculation to a more recent memory. Dooku recalled that on Vajun only months earlier, Yoda had admitted carrying a darkness within himself. This statement became the confirmation Dooku needed. In his mind, carrying darkness within meant studying dark techniques, not simply experiencing the internal struggle every Force user faces. The fallen apprentice mistook feeling darkness for studying it, turning self-awareness into proof of training. Yet, when Master and former student finally confronted each other face to face, Dooku never spoke this accusation aloud. If Dooku truly believed Yoda had intentionally studied the dark side like Kostana researched Sith artifacts, this moment offered the perfect opportunity to expose that hypocrisy. He could have accused his master of following the same path he now condemned. He could have pointed out that Yoda's wisdom came from the same forbidden study Dooku now practiced openly. However, he said nothing of the sort. Their conversation remained focused on philosophy and competing views of the Force. Dooku argued that embracing both light and dark represented true balance. On the other hand, Yoda rejected this interpretation completely. Neither spoke of Yoda personally engaging with darkness beyond acknowledging its existence. The speculation remained locked entirely in Dooku's private thoughts, never voiced to anyone. This silence reveals something crucial about the belief itself. The wondering appears only in his mind in Labyrinth of Evil, framed with uncertainty, used to justify his choices when no one else could hear. Even Dooku himself remained unsure. He wondered whether it might be true. He believed it could explain Yoda's extraordinary abilities. He never claimed it as definite knowledge because he possessed no actual evidence. The word perhaps that prefaced his speculation betrayed the absence of proof. Canon sources prove Dooku's interpretation wrong from an entirely different angle. The Canon Clone Wars animated series episode Sacrifice documents Yoda's spiritual journey to learn the secret of maintaining consciousness after death. During this quest, the dark side itself actively attempted to corrupt him through visions. Darth Sidious and Dooku used ancient Sith techniques to project their power across the galaxy, targeting Yoda specifically. They offered him forbidden knowledge directly, promising to reveal the identity of the Sith Lord in exchange for giving in to darkness. They tempted him with power, suggesting he could gain strength beyond imagination by accepting their teachings. Without hesitation, Yoda rejected every offer. He stated plainly that the Sith had nothing to show him, refusing to engage with their promises. In the final test, they presented him with a terrible choice through vision, offering him the chance to learn who the Sith Lord was in exchange for allowing Anakin Skywalker to perish. Regardless, Yoda responded that he would not be tempted, and that he was ready to sacrifice everything rather than accept knowledge purchased through darkness. Sidious concluded that they had failed to break Yoda's will, acknowledging that his strength proved too great for corruption. This episode demonstrates Yoda facing explicit offers of dark side knowledge and consistently refusing them. This was not a philosophical discussion about whether darkness exists. It was a direct temptation with specific techniques and information, which Yoda rejected. The contrast with Dooku's speculation could not be clearer. The fallen Jedi imagined Yoda studying darkness in secret. Instead, his former master refused it even when offered directly. The distinction between what Yoda taught and what Dooku heard reveals where the misunderstanding occurred. Yoda acknowledged that darkness exists as part of reality. He admitted feeling its pull across 8 centuries. He explained making mistakes during that time, showing honest self-awareness rather than claiming perfection. He warned that Force users must know that darkness exists, meaning they should understand its presence and nature. not that they should train in dark techniques. He specifically cautioned against studying it too closely, establishing a clear boundary between necessary awareness and dangerous obsession. This teaching described the internal struggle every Force-sensitive individual faces throughout life. Darkness pulls constantly at those connected to the Force. The challenge lies not in avoiding knowledge that darkness exists, but in consistently choosing light despite feeling that pull. Yoda's wisdom came from 8 centuries of making that choice repeatedly, from experiencing darkness and refusing to embrace it day after day, decade after decade, century after century. Dooku interpreted this entirely differently because he approached the question from a Sith perspective. The Sith pursue power through intentional study of darkness. They learn techniques that channel negative emotions. They research methods to dominate others through Force abilities. They seek knowledge that increases personal strength regardless of moral cost. Dooku assumed his master must have followed a similar path to achieve such wisdom, because that framework was the only one he understood after his fall. This assumption reflects Sith thinking, where power comes from accumulating forbidden knowledge and mastering dangerous techniques. Jedi wisdom operates on different principles. It comes from experience rather than study, from mistakes rather than research, from choosing correctly rather than knowing more. Yoda's understanding of darkness came from feeling it constantly and rejecting it consistently, not from practicing dark abilities or researching Sith methods. The fallen apprentice could not grasp this distinction because his own pursuit of power depended on studying what the Jedi refused to practice. The truth about what Yoda actually did stands in complete opposition to Dooku's speculation. Yoda felt the touch of darkness across 800 years of life. He chose the light every single time that choice presented itself. He made mistakes, as all living beings do, but learned from them and continued choosing correctly. He acknowledged that darkness exists within everyone because honesty about internal struggles proves crucial for avoiding corruption. He warned his apprentice against studying darkness too closely because he understood the danger inherent in fascination with forbidden knowledge. None of this describes studying dark side techniques. It describes self-awareness, vigilance, and constant choice. The fallen apprentice, viewing these teachings through the lens of his own corruption, reinterpreted honest acknowledgement as evidence of secret training. Yet every source demonstrates this reinterpretation was false. Dooku's fall came from believing exceptional individuals could study darkness without succumbing to it. The difference between master and fallen apprentice was not that one studied darkness while the other abstained. The difference was that one chose light consistently across 9 centuries, while the other chose power, then constructed a narrative suggesting his master had walked a similar path to justify that choice. Dooku's speculation reveals more about his own need for validation than about Yoda's actual practices. It demonstrates how fallen Jedi reinterpret their past to make their betrayal seem less catastrophic, transforming their master's honest teachings about struggle into permission for forbidden study. However, Dooku's story doesn't end here. His place among the most evil acts committed by each Sith Lord reveals a side to him that's easy to overlook, and the full lineage of masters and apprentices who shaped the Sith makes his fall even more unsettling. Be sure to watch them next.